Shaggy looked up at the bright blue sky and sighed. It was a nice day out, really. There were a few clouds in the sky, but nothing major. The birds were singing, Vlad was off making contacts, and he and Levy had a lovely spot on the grass near their truck. It was a very picturesque afternoon except. So then this bloody nonce goes and blows the whole casino up. It's the honest truth. This mangy doggo comes running in, wrecks the place, kills my employer, and then kidnaps me. Bartle cackled in his bad Australian accent. Shaggy rolled his eyes and tried not to engage. The green-haired bastard had found Dave fairly quickly and then followed him back to Shaggy. Now he's regaling anyone that would listen with stories of Shaggy's misdeeds. How can he kidnap you? I thought the game had rules on that, the red-haired XIV asked. She turned a quick smile at Shaggy's annoyed face before she turned back to the wannabe Australian. Mel, Censor, and Cutie were with the pheromone-secreting villain. Bartle's loud yapping had brought them all running. Even now, he was drawing a crowd with his boisterous personality. Nah, love. The game has strict limits on it. But he held me for the full time and questioned me about my bosses. Him and that blue guy over there. Dave gave everyone a wave from his spot at the truck. He and Ren were listening in, but neither did a damn thing to extricate Shaggy from the small group that surrounded him. Levy squeezed his arm good-naturedly. Did you talk? Censor asked. He sang like a canary. Shaggy grumbled. You tricked me, you daft doggo. I'd never have given up me mates. But I get out of Deathville and find that all the bunch in that part of town are gone. The Git's done it. He went and started a blooming war with the wild bunch. Shaggy quirked an eyebrow. Oh yeah, and what are they going to do about it, Bartle? Oh, they ain't doing nothing yet. They waiting to see if incog offs ya. That's why they sent me here to keep watch. Shaggy grinned as XIV and the others stared at Bartle in shock. The green-haired teleporter looked confused for a few seconds until he seemed to catch on. Hey! You did it again. Shaggy tried valiantly to keep a smile from his face. But he couldn't help himself. Bartle was just too easy. The sputtering player kept cursing Shaggy out as Levy turned to 14. How about you? How have you been? I haven't seen you since I broke my husband out of that armored convoy. Is your dumbass friend still with you? XIV grimaced at the mention of Pinhead and shook her head. Nope. Idiot is still in prison. He was with us during the riot where the rest of us all broke out. But then he went to challenge the warden. Mel explained. Censor shook his head. Apparently another player told him the warden of the jail would drop decent loot. Also, you could become the owner of the prison if you killed him. Dumbass. Cutie said, butterfly wings vibrating in agitation. You know what's really dumb? Shaggy asked facetiously. Going to fight an army of robots with pheromone and sensory powers. I mean, I get Mel. She shoots electricity. But what the hell are you and Censor thinking, XIV? You're going to get glassed as soon as the raid starts. XIV glared daggers at Shaggy before she drew a large, black pistol from her waist. This little number is from Undertown. Cost me a shit ton of credits, but it'll do the job. Besides, her pheromones don't just make people go dumb anymore. Mel said proudly. Now she can essentially buff us while we fight. Shaggy nodded. That was a good use of pheromones, and the pistol looked like it could do some damage. Even if it looked like a munitions-based weapon. He would have gone with an energy-type gun. Like the one Censor was holding. The big bearded man was wielding a long silver energy rifle that pulsed green and had a scope on it. With my sight and this baby, I should be able to deal with most of COG's little robots. Censor said proudly. Sure, the older ones. But who knows what he's cooking up in there? Shaggy muttered. All 5 other players looked at him, including Bartle, who was idly spinning a boomerang. They seemed to look confused, and Shaggy tried to remember if he said anything weird. When nothing came to mind, he turned to Levy. but she seemed just as confused. You think we'll see different variants of cogbots? XIV asked, confused. Of course. I mean, what do you think Cog's been doing in there? Hell, he attacked the city with giant silver robots and a bunch of other random shit. But now he has his own realm and the time to come up with more crazy shit. Not to mention the crown of an in-game god, Levy muttered quietly. Sensor snapped his head up at her words, but Shaggy glared him down. They didn't need that little tidbit getting out. If the players learned that some god-tier level item was in play, then all bets were off. They'd eat each other alive. Sensor seemed to realize that as he nodded and let the matter drop. Their little group fell into quiet conversation and were soon joined by Slink and Vlad. The vampire was smiling from ear to ear, but Slink looked paler than usual. The boy had pulled up his hood and was shifting from foot to foot. Shaggy quirked an eyebrow at Vlad, but the pale player simply shrugged. He has been like that since I met up with him. It's like he turtled up suddenly. Shit. Ren said loudly from the truck. He drew several eyes, but the big rhino alien simply marched over to Slink and lowered his head. He kept his voice low, but Shaggy was sure their little group could hear. They are here? Ren asked. Slink stayed quiet, but nodded. Vlad and Dave shared confused looks, but Shaggy groaned mentally as he remembered how Slink started this little game. Levy seemed to catch on too, and Shaggy wondered where she had heard the story. He was sure he hadn't spoken of it. Their little group pulled closer inward as Ren continued talking to Slink. You don't have to deal with them if you don't want to. But it's healthier to deal with these things, you know. They were heroes, right? Vlad asked, catching on and spinning around as if he could find Slink's old tormentors. Slink grabbed Vlad's arm and stopped him from looking around. They all leaned in as Slink almost whispered. I think I'll go with Shaggy's advice. If it's all the same. Once shit kicks off, it will be easier to ignore them. Yeah, dude. Besides, I hear the heroes and villains are going to separate, right? So no sense worrying about people you'll never run into, right? Dave said, wrapping an arm around Slink and shaking the boy. To the other players' confused looks, Shaggy leaned into XIV and whispered simply. Bullies. XIV nodded and looked at Slink understandingly. She turned to tell the others about it and Shaggy was surprised to see Bartle almost become fully livid. The normally jokey wannabe Australian had to be held back as he almost made a beeline right for Slink. Probably to find out who was bullying the poor kid. Shaggy felt his estimation of the teleporter go up slightly. Sure, shit happens in online games, but that's no reason to be an asshole. Shaggy shook off the thought and questioned Vlad. So your little jaunt into the world of players was fruitful? Vlad snapped back to himself at Shaggy's question. Yeah, there are a few people here from Undertown. They don't seem to want to compete with us, but they were interested in seeing what we are about. Wait, was this a recruiting mission, or were you scoping out the competition? Yes. Vlad said aggravatingly. Shaggy wanted to smack the smug-looking vampire. But the ground suddenly shifted beneath their feet. Players all around them screamed in surprise as a few lost their feet and tumbled into the grass. The hill itself seemed to glow with a cascade of different colors. Levy gripped Shaggy's arm and the others all gathered their weapons or used abilities. It's about to start. Levy said, sounding breathless. The magic is surging. Yeah, it is. Bartle said suggestively. Shaggy smacked the player in the arm and ignored the loud cracking noise. Bartle went down in a pile as Shaggy's opinion of the player dropped again. The green-haired fool was rolling on the grass in pain as the glowing grew brighter and brighter. Shaggy felt like the pressure was growing around them and he popped his ears. But it didn't help. The feeling of pressure built and built as the light grew even more bright. Soon Shaggy couldn't see or hear. His only solace was Levy's hand still gripping his arms. Then Shaggy blinked, and it was all back to normal. His hearing was back, his eyes could see, and the mansion on the hill was completely gone. Shaggy quickly looked around, noticing several players doing the same. They were all standing on a red dirt landscape. Their cars and other vehicles were gone. A dark red sky was overhead, dark black clouds drifting lazily. Shouts of confusion rose from everywhere, and Shaggy counted his friends before he calmed down. "What the hell is that?" XIV yelled, pointing to their north. Off in the distance, across the flat dirt plain, was a large city. It was belching smoke and dust into the air, and Shaggy could just make out flying objects hovering over it. The cranking and clanging of gears was low in the air. Shaggy could feel it in his bones as he stared at what he could only describe as a factory city. "There are thousands of them," Sensor said, eyes fixated on the far-off city. "Thousands of what, Sense? Robots?" Mel asked. Sensor waggled his head, unsure. "Maybe? They don't look like robots, though." Shaggy jerked, confused. "What do you mean? What do they look like?" Nearby speedster scouts were coming back to their large group, and Shaggy could hear the news. But they all waited as Sensor collected himself and uttered. "Us? The robots or whatever, they look like us." "Okay, thanks, new guy. Can you be any more vague?" Vlad snarked, before shifting into a black mist. "Vlad. Don't," Shaggy said as other players shouted. "Speedsters down. We got incoming." The large body of players became a mess as the large guilds got their people together. All the while, multicolored streaks of speedsters swirled through all the players. Shouts of alarm went up as mages and player tanks activated abilities. Dave and Vlad turned into black and blue blurs and vanished. Although Dave was now nowhere near as fast as Vlad. Levy moved her arms in a complicated gesture before a large purple dome surrounded them all. "Sense? What's going on?" XIV asked. "I don't know. I can barely make shit out." A red body slammed into Levy's dome and bounced off. A faceless 6-foot humanoid picked itself up and rushed off again at super speed. Shaggy spun and took in the rest of the battlefield. The players were rallying, but the fight was happening too quickly for most of them. The speedsters were doing well, though. Every now and again, a burst of metal and electricity would phase into real time and crash out of a blur. Then a speedster player would appear. They'd celebrate before rushing off again. "What do we do?" Slink asked. "We can't do shit. So we have to leave it to the speedsters. But for now, let's make a break for it," Shaggy said, pointing out of the mass of players. The others all looked at him like he was crazy, and he snorted. "Levy can't keep this up forever, folks. We need to regroup. So let's move." Shaggy tapped Levy on the shoulder and the purple dome dropped. Without another word, they both ran. Heading for the edge of the crowd. Ren and Slink were right behind them, followed by XIV and the others. Bartle's boomerang zoomed over everyone's head and the teleporter was suddenly in the lead, grinning back at them. Then a green blur slammed into his side, and the player went flying. Swearing the whole way. The green humanoid robot blurred into existence and was about to follow Bartle's body when it exploded. Vlad appeared in a puff of black smoke and smiled happily. The vampire turned into smoke again, and the shifting blurs of speedsters around the players picked up speed. Shaggy grimaced as swathes of color zoomed in and out of groups of players. Some were still crouched behind protective abilities, while others were scattering like them. When they finally made it to the edge of the crowd, Shaggy jogged a short distance away and spun. The large horde of players was slowly spreading itself out along the outer edge of Cog's territory. No more streaks of color were coming from Cog City. But it didn't instill Shaggy with confidence. The smoking towers and sounds of metal factories still churning told him Cog was far from done. "Sensor, what's going on with the city?" Shaggy asked. The player turned his eyes to the factory city and focused. After a few seconds, his eyes grew wide. "There are a bunch of the damn bots. Replicas of us, same as before. but now they are spreading out to encircle the city. They are created a defensive perimeter. Ren said. We'll have to break in and stop the factories. Do you think those factories are creating fully grown robots as we speak? Mel asked. Shaggy, Ren, and Slink all shared a look before Slink answered. We've seen it before. Cog has the technology to create massive armies of bots really quickly. What's with the copy bots, though? Levy asked. Cog's given his bots superpowers. Don't know why he went the extra mile to have them look like us, though. Ren sniffed as he hefted his sledgehammer. It's probably automatic. You know? Like, they would take the image of whoever intruded on his realm. That would explain why some of them are faceless. Where the hell is the Mad Witch in all of this? XIV shouted. The fight within the group of players was slowing down. Their speedsters were popping in and out of existence, carrying robot bits. Cheers were going up from a few players that hadn't recognized what was going on in Cog City. Shaggy spotted Bartle was still with them, sporting a decent shiner on his left eye. A shout from Mel got them all turning her way. There. She's on the eastern side of the city. As one, they glanced in that direction. A black and purple army was stepping from a glowing gold portal. Shaggy spotted multiple variants of demons and dozens of mages, some of whom were floating in the sky. He snorted as he realized Corrigan had summoned the players first to deal with any surprises Cog had in store. When they had dealt with the speedsters, she showed up, far away from them. Shaggy grunted. Smart witch. She's a supervillain for a reason, hun. Maybe, but we need to shift out that way. Why? It looks like the raid is about invading this factory city thing. So, shouldn't we get all the players to circle it and then charge? XIV asked. You ever tried to get a bunch of players to do anything? Ren asked. Shaggy could already hear fights and arguments breaking out in the mass of players nearby. A few robot speedsters were rushing about. But they were being handled. Meanwhile, the guild players and independents were yelling at each other about proper raid etiquette. He waved an arm at the crowd, hoping Vlad and Dave would see him. Soon enough, they were joined by the pair. Dave panting heavily, while Vlad looked extremely pleased with himself. Shaggy pointed at the city in the distance and snarked. Don't be too happy with yourself, Vlad. We are nowhere near done. The pale vampire gave him the finger but said nothing. Dave, on the other hand, whooped softly and stared happily at the amassing robots. He sat down in the red dirt and collected himself as they all discussed what they wanted to do. However, a short while into their conversation, a blue witch appeared above them. She was riding a broom and staring daggers down at their group. Shaggy hissed as they were suddenly getting attention from the other players. But Lady didn't seem to give a shit. Instead, she enhanced her voice with magic and shouted down at them. Dave. You are my personal guard. What are you doing over here? We need you over with Corrigan's forces. Dave smiled up at the witch from his seated position. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted. Sorry, lady. We got jumped by a bunch of fast robots. We'll be right over. Humph. Lady crossed her arms and floated down lower. I guess it's all right. Seeing as you have a decent excuse. Dave stood up and Shaggy started herding his friends toward the east. It wasn't that long of a walk. But the other players were staring at them at this point. He really didn't want to share whatever bonuses they got for being close to Corrigan's people. Dave's voice carried on the wind, though, and Shaggy wanted to slap his own forehead. So did you want to tell your dark mistress that we're coming, or did you want to walk with us? Dave smiled up at the witch. She floated lower and lower, seemingly thinking things over. When she was just above them, she dropped to the dirt and hurried over to Dave. Shaggy could see that the woman was blushing as she stood beside Dave and nodded imperiously. I guess since you are my guard, I can deign to walk with you. But you must protect me. She gave Dave a stern warning and wagged her finger up at him. Dave laughed it off, and they all started walking again. Shaggy could see a few people following them at a distance. They didn't have any guild emblems or colors, so he assumed they were dragging a bunch of unaffiliated players with them now. Censor stared in shock at Dave and Lady as they walked. Eventually, the big man couldn't hold it in anymore. Shaggy snorted. Dave's an enigma. But he got us an in with Corrigan. Besides the one you got us, Ren scoffed. I didn't get shit. I just met with the witch. Shaggy cast a nervous glance at Lady, but she was still talking to Dave, who was happily nodding along. The big bearded player turned to 14 and nodded slowly. I see what you meant. XIV nodded back and smiled. I know, right? These guys are a blast. Shaggy groaned and looked toward Corrigan's still growing forcing. The portal was still open, and more demons and mages were pouring through. But at the center of the realm, slowly being surrounded by players, was Cog City. It was still building and churning out more robots. Shaggy could feel his heart beating wildly at the upcoming fight. There were thousands of players and hundreds of Corrigan's forces. With more and more bots being made to stop them, what was coming next was going to be a hell of a fight. Are we sure these demon guys aren't going to attack us? Yes, XIV. Corrigan's forces are on our side. We can trust them. More than the other players, at least. Shaggy answered. They had pushed their way through the assembled forces of Corrigan's mages and demons. Lady lead them past the front lines of the demons and back toward where Corrigan sat. The Mad Witch was surrounded by mages and witches of all stripes. Some of whom, Shaggy thought, were players. Somehow they had worked their way into the Mad Witch's inner court. Corrigan said nothing as Lady dragged Dave over to his spot as her bodyguard. The rest of them joined them and stood ready, facing the far-off factories. Smoke and robots still churned out of the city in the distance. Shaggy stretched his back as he noticed another mass of players heading their way. 2 more groups were circling around to the other side of the city, while even more players were spreading out. Soon, the encirclement would be complete and they would all siege the city. Do we wait? Shaggy asked the others. In the distance, multicolored streaks of speedsters running in and out of the city appeared. Fewer and fewer of them were coming out. Shaggy assumed the bots were learning and setting up traps for the player speedsters. Let's wait till everyone is in position, Ren stated. Vlad, Slink, and Levy didn't disagree. Dave meanwhile was talking to Lady and seemed to be taking his job as bodyguard seriously. XIV and the others were still staring at the large purple and black demons, afraid one of the things would suddenly tear them apart. Shaggy chuckled through his nose and turned to regard the group of players coming toward them. But Corrigan's voice rang out from her spot. Blood God's champion. What is this group that approaches my forces? Shaggy groaned. They've decided that they are your protectors, mistress. Shaggy shivered as he added that last word. But the looks he was getting from the mages and demons made it prudent. Corrigan's snort was loud and filled with derision. XIV and her friends moved closer to Shaggy, probably to ask questions. But Corrigan's next words cut off anything anybody was going to say. Do they think me so weak as to need protection? Pa. Suddenly, a surge of magic thrust itself forth from the ring of mages around Corrigan. A reddish-purple orb shot into existence and surrounded all of Corrigan's forces. Shaggy recognized the obvious shield spell and almost laughed as the Riffraff Guild came to a complete stop. All 500 or so players in the guild stared at the odd dome and seemed to be deciding what to do. Shaggy smiled. That was even more people that would be raiding Cog City. Corrigan would be well protected behind the barrier and the players could focus on the fun stuff. His smile vanished when the Mad Witch made another decree in his direction. Go to your people, champion, and tell them they are unwanted. My witches shall begin bombardment of the city in a few minutes. Shaggy groaned as Vlad and Ring giggled beside him. Slink gave him a commiserating look, while Levy grabbed his hand. You know you're all coming with me, right? Shaggy snarked as he started pushing his way toward the edge of the barrier. They said nothing, but did fall in line behind him. The demons moved aside as Shaggy walked toward the edge. He looked at Levy. Who was the leader of the riffraff again? Were they famous? I don't remember. Levy snorted. They're one of the largest guilds in gaming, and you don't remember them? Tolliver Jones is his IRL name. But I don't think we should go screaming that here. Not good manners. Ren said. Shaggy nodded as he spotted the group of players still outside the barrier. A few of them were in conversation. Probably deciding what to do. They spotted their group sticking out in the sea of purple and black demons. Shaggy saw that XIV, Bartle, Censor, and Cutie had followed them. XIV gave him an apologetic look, but said nothing. Shaggy sighed and turned back to the three leaders of the riffraff. Tolliver was easy to spot. His 6-foot frame and broad shoulders made Shaggy think of old sportsball players. The wicked-looking swords on his hip, however, made Shaggy think more of an ancient warrior. Whatever alien race Tolliver had chosen was one with tanned skin and glowing red eyes. They glared at Shaggy, but he didn't feel any malice in the gaze. At least not from Tolliver. The two women at his side, however, were another matter. One was supposedly Tolliver's sister, if Shaggy remembered the rumors right. But he had no clue as to the other one. Nor did he know why they were both glaring at him like they wanted to flay him alive. Lower this dome, noob, said the darker-haired one, dropping herself straight on Shaggy's shit list. Love, Levy said warningly. Shaggy shrugged and turned to his wife. I am a mirror, my dear. Levy rolled her eyes, but the white-haired lady at Tolliver's side snapped at them both. Then tell the damn NPC to lower it. And how do you see that going? She does what she wants, and she has decided that she doesn't want your protection. Tolliver nodded and looked to his two friends. Both women glared at Shaggy before looking at Tolliver. What do we do? This was supposed to be our in with the Mad Witch, said Dark Hair. The white-haired girl was still glowering, but Tolliver placed a hand on her shoulder and looked back to Shaggy. The tall man seemed to be mulling things over before he came to a decision. Behind him, hundreds of other players glanced between Corrigan's Dome and Cog City. A large part of them seemed eager to get things started. Can you get us an audience? Tolliver asked, voice oddly light and airy. Shaggy raised an eyebrow and bit back his first response. Working on a hunch, Shaggy called over his shoulder. Hey, mistress. Their leadership wants an audience. No, came Corrigan's voice, magically enhanced and ringing in Shaggy's ears. Judging by the sudden jump of those around him, Shaggy guessed that he wasn't the only recipient of the voice. He gave Tolliver a shrug and got ready to turn around, when Corrigan's voice echoed again. Wait. Send them around, champion. I would, indeed, have words with the leader of one of the significant forces on the battlefield. Fickle, Shaggy muttered, before he felt a pinch at his side. Levy twisted the flesh of his arm and he shut up. Angering Corrigan wasn't a smart move. Waving at Tolliver and his two female friends, Shaggy walked them around the dome and toward Corrigan's spot. The rest of the riffraff stayed put in front of Corrigan's forces. You're that dogman that killed Cog the first time, right? Said Blondie. Shaggy grunted and gave a curt nod. Shaggy. Blondie looked like she waited to burst out laughing. But the darker hair woman spoke up first. How did you get an in with the Mad Witch? My wife. Shaggy grumbled. Levy chuckled lightly. My husband is too modest. My mistress spotted his particular talent straight away. I'm Malevolent, by the way, or Levy for short. I'm Pearl, said the dark-haired woman, sizing Levy up. Obsidian, said the blonde woman, still glaring at Shaggy's head. Tolliver smiled at his 2 seconds before he added absently. My in-game name is Tolly. Shaggy bit back a guffaw of his own and kept walking. But Ren snorted. Not straying too far from the Real, huh? I found it's fairly pointless. With this game's character creator not allowing me to change my appearance too much. It made sense. I am fairly famous out of game, so I figured I should lean into it. Tolliver said without an ounce of arrogance. The tan man smiled at them. But Shaggy didn't believe it for a second. The riffraff were known for being fairly ruthless in other games. They'd hold raid points and charge admission in real-world credits. There were even reports of them harassing people in meat space. Shaggy felt a little slimy just standing next to them. Even with the barrier between them. They walked all the way around. Levy making polite small talk until they reached the spot where Corrigan's entourage sat. A tight ring of mages circled an elevated patch of dirt that the Mad Witch stood on. Pearl immediately knelt and bowed her head. "My lady, we've come to be your defenders," Pearl said. Corrigan cackled as she glided down the small hill and toward the barrier. "Oh really? Is that all you've come for? I've already told the Blood God's champion that my people don't need your protection." Shaggy did his best not to react as Tolliver and Obsidian glanced at him. He was sure the player base could work that one out themselves. But he wasn't going to confirm anything. At least not yet. Thankfully, the Mad Witch carried the conversation on. "Besides, I don't think that's the only thing you've come for, right?" Pearl's face was a mask of confusion as she turned to Tolly and Obsidian. Corrigan raised a hand, purple magic sparking into existence around it. The magic sparked and snapped against the barrier, but Obsidian was pulled forward by her waist. She slammed into the barrier until a small rock popped out of her belt and passed through the barrier. A fey stone. How quaint. "Did you want some of my power, little necromancer?" Corrigan asked, evil smile plastered on her face. Shaggy felt himself being pulled and turned to see Levy and the others of his party slowly backing away. Finding it a good idea, Shaggy joined them quickly and moved back into the ranks of demons. All of Corrigan's forces were facing the three. Although, oddly, Tolly didn't seem perturbed by what was happening. Instead, he turned to Obsidian and said simply, "What is that about, Obi?" Obsidian was cut off as a bolt of lightning streaked through the barrier and zapped her right in the chest. To Shaggy's surprise, the player didn't immediately turn to ash. Instead, Obsidian groaned and picked herself up. A necklace fell from her body and struck the ground as the Mad Witch cackled. "So you came prepared? Interesting. Remove your forces from my area, or my demons shall feast upon your people." Corrigan spun on a heel and returned to her position amongst her mages, most of whom were glaring daggers at Tolliver and Obsidian. Shaggy noted that Pearl was silently glaring at the two. A quick examination showed that while Tolly and Obsidian were wearing multiple necklaces, Pearl wasn't. Shaggy grimaced at the uncomfortable conversation that was going to be in Tolly's future. But the leader of the riffraff merely sighed and grabbed Obsidian's arm. The blonde-haired woman was glaring hard at the Mad Witch. It was a look being mirrored by Pearl as she glared at her fair-haired counterpart. All three of them walked off without another word and Shaggy started to follow behind them. Ren tapped his shoulder and gave him a questioning look. "I want to be up front when things start. I think we need to get into position. Once the riffraff find a spot, shit is going to kick off in a big way." "That makes sense. But I don't think the demons are here to charge into Cog's territory. I think Corrigan is going to be largely defensive during everything," Levy said. "Yeah," Vlad nodded. "Her forces are probably going to bombard the city until Cog shows himself. The rest of us are a distraction at best. Let's not forget we also gotta stop those big factory things, dudes. They look crazy dangerous, right?" Shaggy spun at the sound of Dave's voice and saw the player's unarmored form grinning at them. He was looking around excitedly as all the other players finished surrounding the city. Shaggy grinned at his friend's face as the other sputtered in laughter. Levy patted Dave's shoulder as she asked, Hee, Dave. How did you get away from Lady? I thought she wanted you as her guard, right?" "Huh? Oh, yeah. I had a nice chat with her, and we decided that it would be better if I was out here with all of you, you know. Dave said, pale cheeks going slightly red. A chat, huh? Ren chuckled. Yeah, Dave said worriedly. Dude, you have lipstick all over your face. Slink said before falling into peals of laughter. Dave's face went crimson as they all laughed, and the laid-back mutant shook his head. What can I say? I am apparently irresistible. I had to promise to meet up with her after all of this. Sealed that promise with a few dozen kisses, did ya? XIV said. Dave shrugged and wiped his face off. In the distance, Shaggy spotted more robots pouring out of the city. The riffraff had moved to the southern side of the city. Loose lines of players were standing ready, waiting for a starting gun of some kind. Shaggy groaned as he realized that their eastern edge was the weakest side. They had Corrigan's Dome and then a loose affiliation of Soup and Villains. He pointed it out to the others. Our side is going to have the toughest time getting through, he said, looking past the dome. Ren shook his head. Just means that Cog will focus on the other sides more. He's got the combined armies of the Wings and Boys to his west and then the riffraff to his south. If he's smart, he'll pull his bots away from the north and east. Unless he keeps making bots like he is. Vlad groaned. So how do we know when shit begins? Slink asked. Before Shaggy could answer, a purple streak of lighting flashed in the sky above Cog City. It was slowly joined by ever-darkening clouds. More and more purple lightning cascaded across the sky, and the shouts and cheers of players went up from all around. Young Cog's torso appeared from the clouds, a giant purple hologram of the man they were here for. Shaggy felt the air become tense as players readied weapons and spells. Beside him, Ren hefted his hammer and Vlad started to mist up. Slink gripped his rifle hard and Levy's hand pulsed with power. Dave's armor appeared and he danced on the spot. XIV and her friends pulled their own weapons. All around the city, spikes of power shone against the red dirt as the players prepared themselves. Shaggy could even see the robots preparing their own copied abilities. I can happily tell you all that your remains shall be used to empower the new race. So even as you die, know that you shall be made into something new. Something better. Your blasted carcasses shall be the fuel that ignites my journey back into the mortal realm. From there, I shall spread my creations throughout the land, uniting all peoples under one flag, one creed. All shall be equal, and suffering shall come to an end. Your sacrifices here will be glorious. At the end of Cog's speech, lightning thrashed throughout the sky again. Like a starting gun, the lightning signaled Cog's robots to charge. Shaggy took one last look at his friend as he pushed through Corrigan's purple dome. They were ready. The war had begun, and it was going to be wild. Shaggy spotted Dave and Vlad vanishing from their positions as he started running. The ground vibrated with the thundering footsteps of the robots charging in every direction from Cog City. The sound was joined and increased by the pounding steps of the responding players. Shaggy didn't spend any time looking around or finding the positions of his friends. Instead, he spotted a large yellow robot in the shape of a bodybuilder. It had a large torso, and its sleek form was in the shape of a breaded human. Shaggy ignored the robot's muted facial features and readied his pounce ability. Nearby, he heard and felt the sounds of energy weapons and power blasts. Overhead, Cog's purple and black storm waged all around. The wind smelled of oil and lightning as Shaggy threw himself at his target. The sound of other players slamming into the line of Cog bots reverberated through the air as the two sides met. Shaggy saw the flash of steel and heard players shouting incoherently as his own claws sank into the metal torso of his target. The sleek metal robot's chest caved in as Shaggy took them both to the ground. The sound of metal snapping made Shaggy turn. A player's sword had snapped as they tried to cut a nearby robot in two. The edge of their blade was careening toward Shaggy. But he ignored it and sliced his claws through the yellow robot's chest. The robot sparked and sputtered before it went limp. The player's sword blade slapped into Shaggy's side and fell into the dirt as he rolled away. Shaggy sprang up and sliced his claws at a slim blue robot in the shape of a woman. The bot bent away from him unnaturally before it sprang back and punched him in the chest. Shaggy groaned and grabbed at the slim blue arm. He yanked with all his strength, feeling the robot leave the ground. Shaggy slammed the slim robot into the ground and then ripped its stretchy arm off. Nearby, a super strong player bowled over several robots at once and Shaggy had to move back as the cogbots went flying. Lightning cracked overhead again, bringing Shaggy's, and several other players, heads up. In the skies above, Cog's purple torso was still there. But it was now joined by a giant facsimile of Corrigan. The Mad Witch and the Technopath glared at each other over the players' heads. With gusting wind and streaks of lightning, the two giant avatars clashed into each other. Purple and black colors swirled in the air as Corrigan sent bolts of lightning across the sky. Cog answered by crossing his arms and absorbing the bolts before he threw them back with a punch. Shaggy was caught off guard as a big silver robot yanked him from the ground. Before he knew what was happening, Shaggy was sent flying backwards. He felt his body smash into several other bodies before something arrested his flight. Shaggy tried to regain his feet as a large hairy hand tried to grab him. "Whoa. You're still alive?" said a young-sounding voice. Shaggy turned to look at the player that had snatched him out of the air. It was a gorilla alien humanoid. The player had the body of a giant gorilla, but his face and legs were closer to a human. The player was staring at Shaggy in shock. Shaggy glanced back at his flight path and saw several dead players being ghosted, along with some bots that had gotten in his way. "Dude. You got tossed." Shaggy grunted and nodded. "Yeah. Good thing you were in the way then, huh?" "Not for me, dude. You sapped like a quarter of my damn HP." "Shit. Sorry. Don't worry about it. I got some healing potions," the player said, tossing a red orb into his mouth and swallowing it whole. "Would you mind tossing me back?" Shaggy asked, grinning. The player stopped chewing the glass orb and smiled wickedly. "You serious?" Some nearby players turned to look while some dove to the floor. Shaggy had enough time to get his claws in front of him before the gorilla player gripped the back of his shirt and spun. He let his feet leave the ground as his fellow player spun twice before releasing him. Shaggy immediately knew that the player wasn't nearly as strong as the bot that threw him. But he got some distance as he was tossed back in the direction he came. Shaggy did his best to clip anything bot-like as he flew with his claws. But he only got a few before his flight ended and he rolled through the dirt. Popping up, Shaggy sent a slash of his claws into a red bot that was aiming a handful of flames at another player. The bot exploded spectacularly, burning through Shaggy's shirt and sending players and bots alike rushing away. A blast of cold water caught Shaggy in the face and he turned to see a mousy girl with a wand smiling at him. Shaggy gave her a wave as her smiling face turned to awe. His burnt and blackened skin was sloughing off and growing back. A burst of gold light flashed in Shaggy's eyes and he felt his HP shoot up. Another mage past the short girl was rapidly moving his hands as intricate tattoos glowed on his chest. "Don't need it. Thanks though. Send some healing in someone else's direction." The male mage shrugged. "It's all XP to me, baby." Shaggy grinned and gave the mousy girl a thumbs up before he rushed off again. All around, speedsters and energy users were flashing on the battlefield. Overhead, Cog and Corrigan were still engaged in their weird avatar fight. Shouting and cursing were everywhere as the independent players tried to form some kind of cohesive front. Trouble was that no one was listening. Instead, the entire battlefield was a weird scrum of players killing robots. Every now and again, a flash of white cubes would signify a player getting ghosted. But Shaggy paid little attention to them. Instead, he rushed into the melee, throwing his claws into whatever multicolored robot got within range. Occasionally, Shaggy would get hit by a stray energy blast or electrical bolt. But he shrugged it off and pushed deeper into things. It wasn't until a familiar black mist appeared at his side that Shaggy yanked his claws from a robot and stopped. Dude, what are you doing? The others are further in than you. We need to make for the city. Now. Vlad said, as his body solidified. Shaggy ducked a haymaker from a nearby robot. But the punch created a blast of wind that carried him a short distance backward. Vlad vanished and appeared behind the robot. He thrust his long black nails into the bot's back before he tore into it. The robot fell to the dirt, sparking as Vlad glared at Shaggy. Shaggy grunted but gave a nod as Vlad sped away. He had been getting a little too caught up in the fight. He kicked a robot torso at an oncoming robot before he focused inward and released his wolf. If Vlad wanted him to make some time, then he was going to do it in style. With a twisting sensation, Shaggy came back to himself in his wolf form. He gave his great gigantic head a shake before he charged through the ranks. With his new height, he could see over the heads of bots and players. He spotted the city and shifted his direction. All around shouts of alarm went up, but Shaggy snapped at a few robots and that seemed to calm a few players. When it became clear he was making a break for the city, other players followed him. He used his enormous claws and body to clear a path and soon he was leading a charge of players through the mass of robots. The cracking lightning overhead seemed to intensify as Shaggy ran. The wind picked up as well and Shaggy was sure he heard Cog's avatar shouting something. Suddenly, the surrounding robots converged on Shaggy. He felt laser blast and fire hit his fur as super strong robots grabbed at his body. Shaggy grunted. Apparently, Cog was aware of his nature and had singled him out. The bots are ganging up on the wolf. A player shouted before sending an icicle shooting from his wrist. The shard of ice slammed into a bot and exploded into a cloud of snow. Nearby, more players started pulling the bots off. Shaggy dug in with his own claws and batted the nearby bots as hard as he could. A flash of blue and a joyous laugh signaled the arrival of Dave. Shaggy spotted the happy-go-lucky guy tossing bots away from him. Dave gave Shaggy a friendly wave before pointing toward the city. We going in, Shags? Shaggy gave a rough bark and nodded his head. Dave cackled and axe-kicked a robot into metal bits. With the increased pressure, Shaggy had to physically push against an onslaught of robots that seemed intent on keeping him out. Soon it got to be too much. His healing would not hold out at the rate he was being hit. So he dropped the transformation and rolled into the crowd. Players and bots alike were thrown as the giant wolf in their midst suddenly shrank and dashed away. But Shaggy ignored it all and pushed forward. A few players spotted him and followed. Of course, Dave happily bouncing at his side, sending kicks and haymakers into approaching bots, probably didn't help. Several players tried to ask him questions, but Shaggy ignored everything as he pushed forward. Or he tried to. Find him. Cog's avatar shouted from above. The shouting players and silent robots all glanced up. Cog's purple avatar was glaring down at where Shaggy had been. Even as Corrigan's avatar sent a burst of purple fire and lightning into his form. Cog's avatar was slowly deteriorating, but he ignored it as he searched the crowd for Shaggy. When Cog seemingly couldn't find him, the young technopath reared back a spectral hand and tossed a ball of lightning down where Shaggy had been. The crowd scattered as the purple ball of energy slammed into the ground. Players screamed and Shaggy threw himself away from the blast zone. Heat, smoke, and dust filled the air as the crackling ball exploded into tendrils of purple lightning. They sparked through players and bots alike. Each bolt chained into another player or bot before it struck someone else. A wide circle formed as everyone nearby got out of the spell's ways. Shaggy felt his own skin tingling as he kept running. He was just out of the blast zone of Cog's attacking. Thankfully, it seemed Corrigan had used Cog's inattention to strike deep into the technopath's avatar. Avatar Cog growled loudly before he disappeared into sparks of purple magic. The crowds of players sighed in relief, but then realized they still had to contend with Cog's robot army. The field around Shaggy again fell into a wide melee. But at least now the bots weren't actively hunting. No, now he was being pursued by annoying players. He was looking for you, right? Hey, wait up. Where you going? How much do you think Cog would pay for you? Are you like a quest NPC? Dave kept step with him, and Shaggy was aware that his friend was silently guided them somewhere. The other players trailed along behind them as they battled their way deeper into across the dirt plains. Shaggy was surprised to see that as they got closer, the bots started thinning out. Most of the bots were only using a few streets to exit the city and leaving the others alone. Dave led them toward one such side street. Leaning against a wide metal and brick building were Shaggy's friends and wife. He noticed that XIV and her crew were there as well, including Bartle. Shaggy slowed to a stop and finally allowed himself to catch his breath. Finally. Dude, what the hell have you been doing? Vlad snapped. Shaggy groaned as Levy handed him a bottle of blue liquid. Where do you think? I've been fighting bots, you damn wannabe speedster. You can't kill all of them, Shaggy. Ren smirked. No, but it's fun to try. We all here? Slink nodded as he gripped his rifle in his hands. Yeah, and we spotted a nearby factory that's churning out bots. Unfortunately, Vlad only managed to scout one. Why? Shaggy shook his head. A cough brought him around to the group of 20 soups that had followed him and Dave. They were happily looking at Shaggy and his little group. A young man stepped out of the group and smiled at them all before he glanced at Shaggy. So wanna tell us what's up? Not particularly. No. Shaggy said as he threw back the blue potion. He felt his stamina rushing back as the young player grimaced. Oh, come on. We all saw how that Cog guy in the sky singled you out. You know shit. Story shit. You're that Shaggy guy. The one on the forums that got all of this rolling. You killed Cog, said a voice from the mass of people. Shaggy groaned as Levy patted his arm. Oh, my poor husband. So famous. So misunderstood. Loved you too, hun. Levy stuck her tongue out at him and smiled. Nearby, Ren looked over the small crowd before he waved them all forward. We can use all of you, actually. Who? Hell yeah. Told ya. Let's do this. The shouting players fell into silence as Ren clapped his giant gray hands. Once he had their attention, Ren turned to Shaggy's group and said, we need to shut down at least one factory. That'll get more players in here and the wings and boys will have a tougher time holding theirs. I mean, once the riffraff get in here, they are already going to have issues. But if we can throw a bigger wrench into Cogs and their plans, we might as well. You know that's not what I'm here for, Ren. Shaggy said. Ren nodded as the group of new players all leaned in, eager to hear him explain. But when Shaggy didn't, they all shot him dirty looks and one guy even booed. Shaggy ignored the peanut gallery and kept his eyes on Ren. The big Paranadan nodded and leaned in. They can hit the factories while we all go look for Cog. We think he's further into the city. But we haven't had a chance to look. There's a big, city hall-looking building at the center of town. We think he'll hole up there, but I haven't looked. Vlad said quietly. Okay, so who's on Team Factory and who's on the Cog hunt? Shaggy asked. Ren looked around until he caught 14's eye. He waved the redhead over. Do you mind taking the newbies toward the factory? We're going to do something else. XIV studied all of their faces before she snorted and gave them a quick nod. Fine. But you all owe me. If you get some great loot, I want a shot at it. Deal? Shaggy shrugged, not really caring. But the others of his crew were slower to agree. After some quick negotiations that left Vlad and 14 unhappy, they broke apart. XIV turned to the group that had followed Shaggy and waved an arm. You lot are with me. We're shutting down a bot factory. Ren and his team will go north and do the same to another one. Deal? There was some grumbling, but soon 14 and her crew lead the crowd of players away. Now it was just Shaggy with his 4 friends and his wife. They smiled at each other before Vlad pointed a slim finger into the city. He's somewhere in the city. We'll swing past the city hall and trash the place before we spread out from there. Sounds good. Shaggy grunted as he stretched idly. Is there a plan to get Shaggy a shirt somewhere? Slink asked. Yeah, dude, how do you keep losing shirts? They burn. I don't. It's that simple. Shaggy grumbled. I think he does it on purpose, Ren Stage whispered. And thank you for that. Levy winked at him. Shaggy groaned and started walking into the city. Let's go already. We got a geriatric sexist to kill and a god to please. He felt his friends joined him as they walked into the city. Above, the clouds swirled and the clanging and shouting of combat came from all around. The battle was still raging, but Shaggy was sure the players were going to pull through. Once some factories stopped, the city would be overrun with players looking for loot and bosses to fight. Shaggy hoped they could find Cog before then. No sense sharing an epic boss fight. Shaggy dodged under a claw swipe and jammed his own forward. The robot he was fighting blocked his thrust with the metal claws of its other hand. He growled as they jammed their claws together. That the lanky silver robot was just as strong as him annoyed Shaggy to no end. He broke the clash and kicked the humanoid robot in the midsection. Anyone else think these bots are getting cheeky? Shaggy asked as he dropped his claws and went in for a leg grab. Ren slammed his long hammer through two red and yellow bots. What do you mean? No, he's right. Vlad said, appeared next to Ren in a puff of black smoke. Vlad disappeared again and then reappeared, fighting a blurry purple robot. The pair wrestled for a bit, then vanished. The two fast-moving combatants appeared next to Levy, and Vlad continued his thoughts. We've started to meet more and more robots that are geared toward fighting us specifically. Levy slammed her staff into the ground as the vampire robot pair moved again. A pulse of purple lightning cascaded through the area. It fried several robots, but two blue ones absorbed the lightning and charged Levy. But before they reached her, they fell to the ground. Green snakes wrapped around their ankles. Slink ran over to the fallen robots and used his energy pistol to deliver multiple shots to the back of their heads. Both robots seemed to absorb some of the energy until it got to be too much and both heads exploded. Shaggy slid around the robot and grabbed it around the waist. Its claws pierced his arms, but he ignored it as he suplexed the robot into the dirt as hard as he could. The robot's head got stuck in the dirt and Shaggy shifted his hands back to claws and ripped into the thing as it tried to extricate its head. As he did, he spotted Dave nearby. The armored mutant was easily punching his way through several armored robots. Their armor didn't quite match Dave's, but it was a close approximation. Shaggy grimaced as his claws finally dug into the bot's metal and he could freely rend the thing. Tearing metal and sparking electricity filled his ears as he tore the robot in two. Not all of us. Shaggy grimaced as he wiped oil from his face. Dave, what the hell? How are you doing so well against your doppeldroids? The armored mutant turned and shrugged, his voice coming from his faceless helmet. No idea, dude. I mean, I know they are supposed to be tough. I just punch harder and they fall apart. Vlad and pieces of the purple droid appeared next to Shaggy. They shot into existence out of super speed. The pieces of the purple robot went everywhere as Vlad panted heavily. Shaggy could see that his vampire friend had used his teeth to rip the metal robot apart. Vlad spat out bits of the metal robot and hissed angrily. You just punch harder? How does that work? It just work, dudes. Shaggy and Vlad shared an aggrieved look. The vampire dug into his back pocket and pulled a flask of blood and took a long drag. Shaggy surveyed the area before he, too, dug into his pockets. He had stuffed them full of snacks and thankfully, nothing had happened to them. At least not yet. But Levy had a few backups in her bag of holding. They all finished up their fight and Slink recalled his snakes before they began moving again. They had started out jogging toward the center of the metal city. But other players and random robots were constantly getting in their way. They hadn't come to blows with any other players yet. But Shaggy knew it was only a matter of time. The streets were slowly filling with more and more players, and he was sure people were going to section off their own little zones to farm. We have to be close, right? We only had a few blocks to go last I checked. Slink panted. We did. But that was before we had to curve outward. Ren said. We probably have the same amount to go. We need to stop avoiding players and bots and just punch through. You know why we can't do that, Shaggy? We'd exhaust ourselves before we even got to the fight. But, isn't that what we are already doing? Dave asked. Levy nodded. Dave and Shaggy have a point. We keep avoiding player groups and robot patrols. But that just leads us into other robot patrols. We fight, we win, and then we get a little more tired. So straight shot? Ren asked. Everyone but Vlad nodded. The vampire groaned, but he didn't argue as Shaggy bolted down the middle of the street. He kept the top of the city hall building in his view as he spotted several groups of players and robots fighting. The streets weren't full enough to be a problem. But Shaggy ducked around the fights. He monitored the fighting players as they moved, though. Go! Goblin! A young-looking boy shouted as he rolled some dice. The dice opened up like a box and a green goblin with a club sprang out of it. Shaggy blinked confusedly as he watched the goblin bash a few robots. The boy was shouting encouragement for a spot nearby. But he was quickly found and ghosted by several bots. As the boy disappeared, so did the goblin he had summoned. Shaggy winced as he watched the summoner get cubed. His attention was grabbed by the next small melee that was occurring further down the street. It was another teen boy. But at least this one had a few friends to watch his back. But they were all backing away from the approaching robots. Shaggy thought they were all screwed if a robot with ranged abilities appeared. Let it RIP, shouted the lead boy with spiky hair. As one, the boy and his friends raised their arms and pulled on some weird cord. Spinning weapons flew from their hands and charged toward the robots. Shaggy nearly laughed when he realized the kids' chosen weapons were tops. He expected the plastic toys to bounce off the bots harmless, but the blurry little devils crashed right through the robots. Fire, water, and electricity were flung off the whirling dervishes as they seemed to bounce from robot to robot. Shaggy tried to share an incredulous look with his teammates as they ran. But they were all glancing around at other battles that were happening in the street. Then their group was randomly targeted. An enormous boulder made of metal was tossed into Shaggy's path and he dived to get around it. With a quick roll and the summoning of his claws, he was back up. Levy and the others glanced at him as they ran, but he waved them onward. City Hall was getting closer and closer. A brown robot was melting upward from the ground and Shaggy was sure it was the one that had thrown the metal scrap at him. It proved him right by absorbing the metal boulder and growing in size. The 20-foot robot glared down at Shaggy and lumbered forward. Shaggy pounced, aiming for the thing's ankle. With the added push from his ability, Shaggy was able to hit his target first and used his claws to try to cut through the robot's leg. Shouts from players went up as Shaggy held on for dear life and kept swiping with his claws. The robot rocked his foot aggressively, trying to dislodge Shaggy. It's a mid-boss. Someone shouted. Get it? That's kill stealing. It's a raid, dumbass. All bets are off. I think the little dude has this, though. Shaggy growled as he listened to the nearby players. I'm a perfectly average hey-t. The end of Shaggy's sentence was elongated as his claws slipped and he was kicked off the leg of the giant robot. He went tumbling down the street and felt his body slam into the dirt road. After rolling to a stop, Shaggy stood and took in his surrounding. He felt some of his bones snap back into place and he winced as he rolled his shoulders. His approaching friends' confused faces made him grin. How the hell did you beat us? Slink asked. Took the asshole express. Shaggy shrugged as he turned to find the City Hall building again. Suddenly, as they ran, a comet fell from the sky and struck a nearby building. It was joined shortly thereafter by another. Then a giant ice ball, and then a fireball of massive proportions. Shaggy grimaced as the skies were suddenly being filled with magical artillery. Corrigan's forces have started. Levy panted as she ran. Hey, they are technically helping us, Ren argued. A bright orange ball of fire slammed into a building alongside the road and Shaggy gave the big rhino alien a look. Ren sighed and nodded understandingly. The magical shitstorm that was falling on their heads now was a pain they didn't need. The air rapidly heated and cooled, making taking a breath an uncomfortable affair. But Slink pointed a finger down the street and panted loudly. We're almost there. Shaggy nodded and kept the white steps of the government building in his sights. Flecks of ash and snow fell from the sky and Shaggy groaned. Lightning struck right near Dave and sent the blue-armored mutant tumbling. Vlad sped around and picked up their friend as another bolt slammed near Levy. A purple shield appeared as debris and electricity tried to smack into her. Shaggy did his best to keep his eyes skyward. But the white building ahead was getting closer and soon he slid to a stop right at its staircase. He took a second to do a quick head count. All of his friends were there, looking exhausted and a little singed. But still pretty good. He shouted to be heard over the onslaught of magical artillery. This is it. We ready? He got back nods of approval and climbed the stairs. Thundering noises filled his ears and Shaggy did his best to focus on the two wooden doors leading into the building. He cleared the stairs and passed the white columns just before the doors. He placed a hand on the doorknob and twisted it hard. But the thing didn't turn. Instead, he slammed face first into something that was clearly not a door. What is it? Vlad asked. Dudes, what's that noise? The door won't open. It doesn't feel like a door. Shaggy answered Vlad. What do you mean, it doesn't feel like a door? Vlad shouted. Ren moved to the door as Levy's hands glowed. Slink pulled his rifle and knelt down near a column as a lookout. It sounds like a whirring noise. He's right. This door is solid. There's nothing on the other side, Ren said, pulling his hand away. So it's a fake door. We just have to find the real one. Vlad said, starting to turn into mist. There's, like, a rumbling too. Dave. There's magic and shit going off everywhere. Of course, there's going to be some noise. Shaggy said, but Levy stuck her glowing hand out. He's not wrong. This place doesn't feel like a building. It's more like. Levy didn't finish her sentence as the ground they were standing on shifted. The building rumbled, and they all grabbed onto whatever they could. Slink gripped the white column with his bare hands as Shaggy dug his claws into a wall. He spotted Levy helping Ren and Dave get some kind of magical hold. Vlad was nowhere to be seen. Cog's voice popped into existence around Shaggy's head and it seemed to come from everywhere at once as the man cackled. What's happening? Levy shouted back. I don't know. But everyone, hang on until it's over. Ren shouted back. It was as good a plan as any. So Shaggy dug his claws in and waited for the rumbling to stop. But it was taking way too long. The sounds of magical artillery continued, but the players' shouts and voices died down considerably. It wasn't until minutes later that Shaggy looked around again and saw his friends still clutching onto the building for their lives. But the view around the building had changed considerably. Why shit? Shaggy shouted. Where are we? Ren shouted as they all stood again. The rumbling was still constant. But with some effort, they could walk around. Slink, who was still wrapped around the column, gulped loudly as he looked out around the building. The dark sky of Cog's realm was visible all around, along with the purple sparks of magic in the air. We're in the air. Slink shouted in alarm and moved toward the building. Shaggy nodded and moved toward the edge of the building. Looking down, he hissed. Below was Cog's city. He could make out the magical bombardment from Corrigan's forces, and he could even see the robot factories. Energy beams and magic filled the streets below. Dave gave a whistle as he took it all in. Then the platform they were standing on rumbled. A giant arm came into view. They all watched as a metallic arm slammed down into the city and crushed several players. When the arm retracted, Shaggy got a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Dude, we're, like, 100 feet in the air, aren't we?" Dave said excitedly. They all stared at him blankly before they rushed to the side. Levy and the others took in the view before a large leg moved from beneath them. Everything rumbled again as the robot they were on moved. Its fist crashed into the city again and more players were ghosted. The players had started to rally, and Shaggy could see multiple players trying to beat against the thing's legs and arm. "Well, at least Cog only had time to build one," Ren said. But before anyone else could answer, the entire world shook again. Shaggy gulped as he watched multiple giant robots pull themselves from the ground. All around the city, houses yanked themselves from the ground and became the heads and faces of 100-foot-tall robots. The players scattered, and Corrigan's bombardment switched targets. 5 robots made of silver and bronze metal pulled themselves from the ground and started to pummel the players in the city. "That's your fault, Ren," Shaggy muttered as he pointed at the mayhem below. Shaggy looked at the others before he shook his head and sighed. "I've got no idea, kid." Shaggy and his friends stared down at the chaos below. The giant robots stood well over 100 feet tall and they were crashing their way through the city, pummeling the ground as they went. Corrigan's mages were still sending fireballs and icicle showers raining down across everything. The players and robots were fighting like mad while trying to dodge the footsteps and metal fists from the gigantic robots. "You know, all things considered, this is a killer view." Ren smirked. "You're not wrong. But we have to do something. How long can the players keep this up? One swipe from the gigantobots and we lose dozens of people," Shaggy said as he used a column to steady himself. Ren shrugged as fireballs and energy beams slammed into the giant bot's legs. The players and bombardment were doing damage. Just not enough to quickly take out the bots. Not with the factories still turning out generic robots every second. Shaggy scanned the city as he tried to find the smokestacks that signified Cog's massive automated factories. He could see a few from where their giant robot was. But they didn't have a view of the streets down there. The giant robot they were riding bent low to swipe its arm across the street. Shaggy spotted several players trying to get out of the way. But most didn't make it. The large metal arm sweeping across the land made the players explode into shards of light. The cubes of light disappeared into the air and Shaggy wanted to growl in frustration. "Where's the respawn point?" Levy asked. Shaggy turned a confused look to his wife. But Ren answered. "Probably outside the realm. That way they'd have to wait to be ported back. Kind of like a respawn timer." "So we'll get these people back?" Slink asked excitedly. "Yeah. But they'll have to wait, and time is something you don't have much of in a raid." "Dude, doesn't that, like, depend on the raid?" "Yes, but if you take too long in most raids, something will punt everyone out. So this raid has an endgame. We just don't know what it is. But I bet it has something to do with Cog. So all we need to do is get Shaggy near Cog and see what happens." "Oh great. I'm the werewolf down the mine shaft." "That's the plan, love. But first we have to get down. Also, has anyone seen Vlad?" They all looked around the small white slab of stone they were on. The robots all used buildings as their heads. Shaggy and his friends were essentially near the robot's ear, which was the side of the City Hall building. Last Shaggy remembered, Vlad was misting up and getting ready to speed away. Had the vampire made it off the robot? The thought was enough for Shaggy to choke on a chuckle. The fact that Vlad was going to miss out on something epic again was hilarious to Shaggy. LP. Shaggy straightened up as he heard something on the wind. Ren and the others were still glancing around the small area. Dave was even checking over the side. Shaggy flapped his hands and shushed everyone. Did y'all hear that? Hear what? Air. Shaggy saw Dave's head snap up and start to look around. You heard it, Dave? Yeah, dude. What is that? Uckers. That one, everybody heard. Slink spun on his butt and stood up, charging around the side of the building. Shaggy and the others followed closely and carefully. The side of the building was the front of the robot's face, and they were running straight toward it. Slink stopped at the edge of the building and peered around. Shaggy joined the boy and felt Dave and Ren peer around him. What met their gaze was a sheer white wall with 2 windows in it. Just below the wall was the robot's silver and bronze metal chest. Its barrel chest hissed steam and cranked loudly. There. Slink snorted in a half-giggle. Hanging off the side of the robot's chest, his nail stuck through the metal, was Vlad. He was glaring up at them all. Shaggy couldn't help the laugh that exploded from his mouth as he watched their pale friend clinging to the side of the robot. Ren and Dave joined him as Vlad visibly hissed beneath them. Once they had collected themselves, they all stuck their heads together. Shaggy noticed that Levy's hands were glowing and she was doing something. But he decided to tackle the Vlad problem first. You have to go down and get him, Shaggy. Ren started. Whoa. Why me? He's not that far down, let him climb up. Dude, if he could do that, don't you think he would've? Guys? Levy said, sounding worried. All 4 of them turned to Levy in time to see her purple glowing hands move over the floor and walls. She grimaced at them as she cancelled whatever spell she was doing. I think we have incoming. Ren readied his hammer as Dave summoned his suit. Slink started to pull his long energy rifle, then thought better of it and pulled 2 small energy pistols. Shaggy grew his claws and got in front of his wife. They all glared at the walls and the sky around them, waiting. Levy pointed to the white stone wall of the robot's head. They are coming from in there, and it's a lot of them. She pulled back a fistful of magic and waited as everyone reoriented and waited. It didn't take long before several square bits of wall shifted upward and several dark square spaces were revealed. Those dark spaces were almost instantly filled with dozens of tiny, spindly robots that crawl out. They chittered and clacked as hordes of them threw themselves at Shaggy and his group. Shaggy used his body to catch the launching robots. They were barely 2 foot tall and rail thin, but they had long needle-shaped arms. They tried to stab Shaggy all over his body, but he let his dermal armor do the work and swiped his claws through any within reach. Their thin bodies caved easily under Shaggy's claws. But there were loads of them. Ren tried to use his body and hammer to block up one of the portals. He was doing a good job, but Shaggy wondered how long the big guy could hold. Slink was firing at anything that got too close to him as Dave was batting the bots aside just as easily as Shaggy. He couldn't see what Levy was doing, but occasionally a tiny bot would explode as purple magic hit it. When it became obvious that Ren, Dave, and Shaggy weren't viable targets, the tiny robots redoubled their efforts to get at Slink and Levy. Shaggy maintained constant vigil around Levy, and the pair of them were destroying bots at a rapid pace. But Slink only had his 2 guns and the robots were pushing the boy closer to the edge. Dave. Shaggy called, pointing at the still retreating Slink. Dave's helmeted head turned to regard the situation before nodding at Shaggy. The blue-armored mutant moved to help Slink as Shaggy used the body of one robot to destroy another. They had stopped pouring from the hole now, and Ren was using his large fist to flatten the little things. Oh shit! Dude! Shaggy spun as Slink gave a cry of alarm and Dave shouted. He saw Slink had finally been pushed off the edge. Dave had the boy by an arm, but several tiny bots were on his armored body, poking away with their needle arms. Shaggy grimaced as he kicked another bot away and swiped through another. If he moved, they damn things would get to Levy. He wanted to wait to see if Dave could lift he kid up, but a cool hand patted his arm. Go help our friends. Levy all but screamed in his ear. The robot rocked harshly as it punched into the ground again, and several more robots went flying off the side. Shaggy chuckled and began cutting through the things. A flash of purple brought his eyes around to Levy, and he saw his wife batting several tiny bots away with her staff. Her personal shield flared purple as a bot tried to stab at her ankle. Near the building wall, Ren was doing something to the square portal the bots had come through. Shaggy didn't have enough time to parse what the big guy was doing, though. There were still several small bots to deal with. The cleanup went fairly quickly, with Shaggy, Slink, and Dave walking from one end of the building to the other. They swept the bots of the side or just straight up killed them. Ren and Levy were working on something, but Shaggy focused on taking out the remaining bots. When Slink kicked the final one from the side, Ren called them all over. They rushed to his side to see that the big alien had wrenched the square portal open on all sides. The hole was now big enough to fit someone Ren's size. Given the way Levy was panting, Shaggy guessed she helped in some way too. From the inside? Shaggy smiled back. What about Vlad? They all turned to regard Slink before rushing to the side of the building again. A quick recon proved that the surly vampire was still hanging onto the top of the robot's chest. He cursed at them, but most of his words were swallowed by the rushing wind. They all put their heads together again. Shaggy. Dude, I am not throwing myself down there. You don't have to throw yourself, love. Just crawl down and get him. Or, better idea, we go through the inside and get him. How we're going to find him? Shaggy grimaced as his mind raced for an answer. As he scanned his friends, a thought came to him. Slink, can you use your snakes to scout the inside? The pale teen nodded slowly. Yeah, but how does that help Vlad? Well, we can use them to help us navigate to where he is, right? Maybabe, I really don't know. They have a better sense of direction than me, and are really good with sense. But still. Well, it's either that or toss my ass over the side. So I say we go with Team Snake Finder. Shaggy glanced at his friends and wife. Sadly, he wasn't surprised to see them all consider the idea of tossing him over the side. To curtail any of that thought, Shaggy marched over to the large hole in the robot's house head. Ren sighed loudly as the others all walked over to join Shaggy. They stared into the darkness of the robot's head. Pipes hissed with steam and cogs whirled in a loud symphony of noise. In the dark, Shaggy thought he could see more of the little bots moving about the inner workings. Fine. Slink and Shaggy, you two make your way down to where Vlad is. Levy, Dave, and I will start wrecking shit up here. Why am I still the vampire grabber? Because you're still the toughest of us. So if shit goes sideways, Slink can bail on you and you'll be alright. The rest of us have to watch each other's backs. Levy is on heals, Dave is DPS, and I'll tank. Shaggy winced, but he agreed with the assessment. As they all got ready, Slink dropped Larry and Curly to the floor and the two green snakes slithered into the robot's head. They gave the snakes a few minutes head start before Shaggy and Slink dove into the darkness. Ren's voice followed them as they ran through the narrow space. Try not to get killed. No shit. Shaggy screamed back as he sliced through every pipe he could see with his claws. He didn't know how far the chest was from the robot's head. But he was going to do as much damage as he could along the way. Slink seemed to agree as he heard the rapport of Slink's energy pistols going off in the darkness. They both tore off into the darkness to rescue a vampire from the bosom of a giant robot. Scree-tink. Scree-tink. Do you have to do that? Slink asked from behind Shaggy. Shaggy said nothing as his claws screeched through another bunch of bronze pipes. When they finished gliding through the metal, his heavy claws bumped against the next pipe before scratching through. Shaggy finished clawing through the pipes and turned his head in the narrow passageway. Yes. We are trying to do as much damage as possible to this thing. So I'm going to cut through every damn pipe I can see in this jungle gym. Slink scoffed and kept his energy pistol at the ready. Well, you're going to call every one of those needlebots straight to us. Which will free up our allies to take down this damn bot even harder. Shaggy grinned as he stepped past a steaming pipe and easily sliced through it. Whatever nasty steam was in it rushed out into their narrow hallway. Slink and Shaggy both covered their mouths and noses from the smell and hurried forward. It wasn't the first steam pipe that Shaggy cut through. The others had also emitted a nasty-smelling gas that made Shaggy and Slink retch. Damn it, Shaggy. Can you at least not hit those? That shit is disgusting, whatever it is. Shaggy agreed, but shook his head. Nope. Those are probably the most important pipes. I have to figure all of this tangle of pipes does something. Slink sighed and scanned their surroundings. Probably looking for needlebots. Shaggy joined him and took in the narrow spaces and jumble of pipes and cogwheels. The hallways they were traveling were clearly not designed for humans to squeeze through. They jutted out at odd angles and twisted in weird directions at random. Shaggy and Slink had started by trying to go down into the giant robot's neck and then to the chest. But the place was a labyrinth of pipes, metal wheels, and random shutters. Shaggy spent much of their travel time breaking through barriers that got in their way. Which he was happy to do. Aside from breaking stuff and being on the lookout for more bots, there wasn't much to do. A sudden flash of blue and a shout of excitement from Slink brought Shaggy around again. He had to scrunch his shoulders a bit to turn around, dragging his claws against everything as he did. What? What happened? Nailed a little bastard that was over there. Slink said, pointing into a tangle of pipes. Now who's calling them to us? Shaggy snarked. Slink went pink in the ears, but he still defended himself. Hey! If you, breaking everything in sight, didn't send them running. Me killing a few won't either. Sound logic? Shaggy nodded as he turned back around and kept moving. He thought they were still moving downward. But the robot's constant rumbling and the dark environment didn't help much with directions. He called over his shoulder as Slink took another potshot at a random bot in the distance. Are we still following your snake? He was just ahead of us, right? Slink slotted a small battery into the base of his energy pistol as he responded. No. Larry took off into this metal quagmire to find Vlad. I think we're still in the neck. But I have no way of confirming that. Shaggy nodded as he let his claws slice up pipes again. What about Curly? He's off with the others. Ren's got them moving toward the brain. Although that presupposes that Cog built his bots to have the same anatomy as humans. Best guess we can make, really. I guess we could also assume that this thing is like a car. With an engine stashed somewhere. Why only one, though? Huh? Slink coughed before he continued. Ahem, why assume that Cog only gave these things one engine? If we are talking about a giant robot, it would need multiple power supplies, right? Shaggy thought about it for a bit before nodding. Ya ain't wrong. Maybe this thing has a few backups. But for now, let's hurry and grab our vampire. Maybe he has a better idea about how to shut this thing down. I was thinking about that. Slink said as they kept moving. You're going to cut our way outside and grab Vlad, right? Yes, Shaggy answered, confused about where this was going. So why don't you just cut our way down? Slink asked. Shaggy grunted in momentary confusion. As he did, he idly swiped his hand through more pipes. He looked at his hand before glancing downward at the metal floor. He didn't think there was any reason not to try. Although, he also didn't want Slink to know he hadn't thought of that. Didn't think of that, did you? Slink asked, bemused. Shaggy grunted and spun on the spot. Pulling back his two clawed hands, he thrust them downward into the floor. He felt the metal tug against his hands a bit, but it gave easy enough. With some slight body contortions, Shaggy spun around in a crouched position, cutting a hole in the floor. As he did, a noxious smell filled the hallway. Once the hole was complete and before he could do anything else, the metal section he cut out was lifted into the air. Slink gagged as Shaggy felt a wave of liquid hit his legs and shoes. The stench of fetid flesh and old blood filled Shaggy's nose, and he was momentarily stunned. Slink was still, retching as Shaggy backed away from the hole he made. Chunks of something hit his legs as he moved through the quickly dissipating water. It was being flushed further downward as the robot moved. As he looked down in the dark, Shaggy was reminded of what Cog used to power his creations. "What, Gruck, what is that?" Slink asked as he gazed at the floor. Shaggy swallowed the bile in his throat as he answered. "It's dead people, Slink. Cog uses dead people as fuel." "Oh God." Slink tried to push past Shaggy, and he let himself be moved away as he stared at the chunks of corpses. Hands, feet, arms, and legs all shifted slightly as the reddish-gray liquid drained away. Whatever Shaggy had cut into was clearly full of corpse slurry. As Slink passed him, Shaggy grimaced as what he had to do flashed through his mind. "Cover your nose and keep moving," Shaggy called as he jammed the claws of his left hand into the floor. Slink didn't answer as he picked up the pace. Shaggy followed as he dragged his clawed hand through the floor. For long claws pierced the metal floor as his thumb claw scratched it at an odd angle. Water sprayed behind him as whatever he was cutting into disgorged its contents into their hallway. Splashing water and bits of fingers and toes swept across the floor before Shaggy turned forward and kept moving. However, the smell was getting worse. Before Shaggy could answer, the tinkling sounds of little metal needles striking metal filled the hall. The chittering and clacking of the needlebots grew. He could see the tiny little bastards creeping closer through the mishmash of pipes. Something they clearly don't like. "We got incoming, Slink," Shaggy called as he kept his left claw down and kept moving. "Shit." Slink's energy pistol filled the hall with blue light. Little blue balls of energy slammed into the wave of oncoming bots. A few bots jumped at Shaggy but were summarily sliced in half as he kept moving. Up ahead, Shaggy saw Slink draw his second pistol and start firing wildly. The close quarters meant that the boy rarely missed. But he was slowing down as he tried to shoot and run. "Keep moving, Slink." The boy didn't answer except to slow down more. Shaggy was about to shout again when he spotted a large orange snake slither its way through the pipes. He almost laughed as Slink increased his speed dramatically. The boy had slowed down to unleash his largest snake, Mo. Shaggy chopped a charging needlebots in half as he kept an eye on the large orange snake. The damn predator seemed at home as it weaved its way in and out of the pipes. Once it found a target, Mo would use its body like a whip and crush the bots in half with its sheer weight. A few bots went after the enormous snake, but it seemed to evade them with ease. Shaggy kept clawing the floor for another 20 feet of hallway before he wrenched his hand out of the floor and focused on running. The blue streaks of Slink's energy blasts were still filling the darkness ahead. So he chased those as Mo slithered along the pipes next to him. The needlebots followed along, jumping and trying to jam their needle-like appendages into Shaggy and Mo. Shaggy made sure to do as much damage to the surrounding environment as he did to the small robots. He used their bodies to crush pipes and jam gears as he ran. Shaggy slowed as he spotted Slink ahead. Standing at T-junction, the hallway splitting as the pipes crawled alongside. Slink shrugged at him and Shaggy waved a hand to the right. It was better than standing around. More and more needlebots were showing up, and the boy was far squishier than Shaggy was. As Slink turned down the right hallway, Shaggy came to the junction and stopped. Turning back around, he saw a mini horde of the tiny silver bots crawling over each other to get at him. They were dashing through the slop of body parts and water as they approached. Shaggy could see ears and fingers jammed onto the ends of the needlebot's appendages. It would have been funny if it wasn't so macabre. Mo stopped on a pipe next to Shaggy's head and looked down at him. Purple tongue licking the air. "Get out of here." "I got this," Shaggy growled at the snake. The large orange snake seemed to nod as the oncoming wave of needlebots got closer to Shaggy. He had enough time to set his legs and lower his center of gravity before the metal wave hit him. He felt their little weapons got to work on his tough skin, but he ignored it. Instead, he kicked and flailed around, throwing off the robots as they attacked him. Occasionally he'd feel his claws catch on something metal, but they'd soon slice cleanly through and he'd go back to flailing. They crawled over his body, and a few tried to work their way into his pants as he slammed his body into the nearby pipes. Metal shards and broken cogs went everywhere as Shaggy felt trickles of blood seep from his skin. His healing closed the wounds almost as soon as they opened. But that didn't stop the blood from covering his body. His naked torso was almost slick with it. Finally, after what felt like hours to Shaggy, he kicked the last of the little bots into a wall. He watched the skinny little thing burst into pieces as he panted heavily. His health was fine, but his stamina had taken a hell of a hit. Shaggy ran a hand through his hair and felt little bits of metal crash to the floor. He wanted to laugh, but his body was sticky with blood and he felt really gross. "Dude," Slink voice said from his right. "Hey Slink. Did I get them all?" Shaggy asked, sucking in a lungful of air. "A few came after me and Mo, but we handled it." "You good?" "You're covered in blood." "Noticed. But I'm fine. Little bastards could barely get through my skin, but when they did, they made it count." Shaggy leaned against a wall and got his breathing under control. He watched his stamina meter go up as Slink cautiously kept watch. His two pistols sweeping around. Mo curled his way onto the slim boy's shoulders and carefully wrapped around his neck. Slink didn't seem to mind as they took a well-deserved break. "Any word on Vlad or the others?" "I haven't focused on Curly. But Larry has found something. But I don't think it's Vlad." "Can't you talk to them?" "I have to focus and we've kinda been busy." "Fair. Want to do it now?" Slink seemed to think about it before he slowly nodded. Shaggy saw Mo tense as Slink closed his eyes and focused on his connection with the others. The pale boy's eyes fluttered under their lids and Slink seemed to sway on the spot. Although, Shaggy figured that could just as easily be the giant robot they were in. A few minutes later, Slink came back to himself and smiled. "Okay, the others are fine and are taking things slowly. But they think they've found the brain." Shaggy nodded. "Then that's where we are heading. I'll cut to the outside from there and the three of us can take out the engine." Slink nodded and closed his eyes again for a few seconds. When he came back to himself, he pointed down the hallway and took off. Shaggy followed along and watched Mo slither into Slink's shirt. The boy almost tumbled as he reabsorbed his snake, but Shaggy gave him an arm. "Glad to see that's gotten easier, at least." "Yeah, still feels so good, though." "Don't want to hear it." "I'm just saying." "La la la, I'm not listening." They both smiled as they kept running through the narrow and twisting spaces. Slink used his connection with the Larry to easily lead them through the giant bot's inner workings. Every now and again, Shaggy would have to claw or punch their way through. But soon Shaggy spotted a small green snake in the middle of their path. He thought it was weird, though. It didn't seem like they had gone up or down within the bot, though. Slink picked up his little snake and turned to Shaggy, grinning. To Shaggy's confused look, the boy merely smiled and pointed into a room. It was slightly ahead and just off the hallway. Shaggy ducked his head in and whistled at what he saw. Two large silver machines were side by side, pistons pumping, and a gray and red liquid sloshing through both machines. He had no frame of reference for what kind of engine he was looking at. But the soup of body parts churning through both machines and then being whisked away through the robot made him think of a heart. So we were right. He's using some weird body soup as fuel and this engine is pumping it through the robot. Slink said smugly. Shaggy grunted. That's great. But does that mean we were right and Cog has backup somewhere else? Slink shrugged and looked around. The room wasn't that large, but that was because pipes of all shapes and size were nestled around the twin engines. Like a web of metal, the pipes twisted into and out of the engine, carrying the disgusting river of sludge. Shaggy grimaced as he looked back out into the hall. Another nest of pipes met his gaze, but still he pointed at it. That should lead to the outside, right? Slink looked at where he was pointing and nodded slowly. If the engine is the heart, then directly opposite would be the ribcage and then the chest. Shaggy nodded and dove forward, arms extended. Time to get our angry friend back then. Shaggy clawed and dug his way through the pipes. Behind him, Slink and his little green snake kept watch, but nothing bothered them as Shaggy dug. Eventually, he hit a bronze and silver alloy that was a little rougher to cut. Instead of using both his claws, Shaggy gripped his right wrist with his left hand and pushed. It was a difficult cut, but he managed to slowly slice a large square out of the metal. Once he was done, the piece fell away and Shaggy was staring back out into Cog's realm again. The dark sky and the showering magic filled his vision as he stuck his head out. Below, he could still see the city. Shaggy turned his head to the right and spotted his friend about 10 feet away, still stuck to the giant robot's chest. Shaggy could see more claw marks where Vlad had clearly tried to climb his way up. Shaggy put his arm on the edge of his cutout space and grinned. "I can leave your ass out there if it's like that." Shaggy, Vlad said warningly. Shaggy merely grinned as he moved closer and held out a hand. "Come on, grab my hand. Move closer," Vlad called, trying to reach. "I could, but that would mean more digging and cutting." "Can you wait?" Shaggy saw Vlad's pale face go even paler. The vampire was clearly torn between waiting and wanting to get inside. "What about your super speed? Just zip your ass in here." Vlad shook his head. "I'd been weightless for a few seconds, and in that time I'd slip a few feet before I could catch myself. I can't run up the side of things. At least not without a running start." Shaggy groaned as he clawed his way sideways. He shouted through the hole as he worked. "Looks like you're waiting then. Slink, see what you can find out about that engine." "Got ya, Shaggy," Slink's voice said behind him as he dug. "Where are the others?" Vlad shouted. "In this thing's head, probably trying to find a way to stop it." Shaggy called back as he tossed a few pipes over his shoulders. "Good plan." "We thought so." Shaggy grunted as he quickly dug closer toward his friend and then started on the tougher outer metal. Once his claw was through, he heard Vlad give a small shout. "Whoa, Shags. Too close. Go a few inches the other way." Shaggy growled as he dragged his claw back. "Sure thing, your lordship. Would you like anything else? Maybe I can get you some lemonade? Maybe peel you a grape?" Once he had cut out another square, Shaggy jammed his head outside and glared at Vlad. From up close, he could see that the vampire was clearly sweating and seemed in pain. Upon further inspection, Shaggy noted that Vlad's fingers were freaking bleeding. Tight-lipped, he reached over and grabbed his friend. Vlad went limp as Shaggy dragged him inside. Once safe, Vlad collapsed to the floor and sighed heavily. "That was hell on my damn stamina." Shaggy crouched down. "I bet. You gonna need a minute?" "As many as you can give me." "I had to keep switching hands and digging my nails in to let my stamina come back." The wind wasn't helpful either, nor were Corrigan's witches throwing random spells at this damn thing. Vlad grinned. "Sounds good." They shared a brief smile before the floor beneath them jerked wildly. Everything around them went silent as the cogs stopped moving and the pipe stopped hissing. Shaggy glanced worriedly at Vlad before he rushed off to the engine room. Inside, Slink was picking himself off the floor as Larry slithered under his shirt. "What did you do?" Shaggy asked, alarmed. "Nothing. I didn't touch anything. I think." Slink trailed off as the ground beneath them tilted dangerously. Shaggy swore under his breath as he grabbed Slink and ran back out to the hallway. Vlad was standing as their entire world kept tilting dangerously. "The robot's falling," Shaggy said as he looked for something to hang on to. The hallway was going sideways as Shaggy looked around until he spotted the hole that he had made in the chest. Judging by the way the bot was falling, the hole would face upward. All they had to do was survive the fall. Shaggy dismissed his claws and gripped the edges of the hole, and held one with all his might. "Hold on to me!" Shaggy shouted as the bot was almost fully horizontal. Slink didn't ask questions as he jumped up and grabbed Shaggy by the waist. Vlad took a few precious to sigh as the bot finally tipped over. They all went weightless as the bot rushed toward the ground. Shaggy felt Vlad dig his nails into chest, but he ignored it as he focused on maintaining his grip. He knew the tilt and the fall were going to be the easiest parts. With an otherworldly amount of noise, the giant metal bot slammed into Cog City. The force sent a jolt go through the whole robot. Shaggy felt his arms absorb the jolt and then both of his arms pop loudly. He gave a cry of anguish as all three of them fell into the hallway wall, now the floor. Slink and Vlad rolled away as Shaggy smacked his head against the metal wall and groaned. Shaggy grit his teeth as his arms slowly popped back into place. "Yeah? How about next time you do that shit? Is this thing wrecked?" Slink asked. Shaggy rolled his head to look at the young boy. "Don't know. One of us should go up and look." "On it," Slink called after looking at Shaggy and Vlad. The teen crawled up the still stagnant pipes and cogs. Vlad and Shaggy shared a look before they joined Slink in climbing. Shaggy did his best to ignore the pain. No one knew what was outside the bot. Players, being what they were, would probably be on their way right now to claim the spoils of a giant robot. A tired Vlad and a wounded Shaggy were far behind Slink as the young boy pulled himself from inside the robot. Shaggy crept through next and turned to help Vlad through as Slink drew both his pistols and looked around. As Shaggy yanked the vampire out of the robot, a young woman's voice came from behind him. "Sebastian," said the shocked voice. Shaggy pulled himself to his feet and stood as Slink stared at the young blonde girl. She was about Slink's age and so were the other people around her. A few were dressed as wizards and mages, while others were in heavily armored tactical gear. They were standing just beside the robot's chest, looking up at Slink. Slink looked gobsmacked as his voice came squeaking out. "Lindsay?" Shaggy started to put things together as a myriad of emotions flashed through Slink's face. These were the assholes that had tricked Slink into playing the game. Shaggy shared a grin with Vlad before they both nodded. Ignoring the peanut gallery, Shaggy grew his claws and stood up. "Hey, Slink. We aren't done yet." Slink jolted as if surprised before he turned to Shaggy and Vlad. Shaggy saw Vlad inspecting his own dark nails and doing his best to show off his fangs. Meanwhile, Shaggy flexed his large claws. They both ignored the kid standing on the ground and looked at their young friend. Slink smiled at them as he raised both his pistols. "Right. We have to get to the head and check on the others." "Sounds good. Lead the way, boss." Slink started running across the robot's fallen body. Shaggy and Vlad joined him, both flanking him as Slink called back over his shoulder. "We'll talk later. I got shit to do." Shaggy almost cackled as he heard the other kids' shouts and questions. But they ignored them as they headed for the white building that served as the robot's head. Vlad rushed forward and patted Slink's shoulder before he turned into mist and vanished. Shaggy easily kept pace with Slink and started running backward. He examined the young kid's face for any signs that he was upset. But instead, Slink just gave him a wide smile. "Shaggy?" "Yeah?" Dave had already punched a hole out of the head when Shaggy and Slink arrived. Their giant robot was still lying in the rubble, unmoving. Shaggy could already hear the voices of approaching players and even the clanking of robots. Even with the other giant robots smashing around, players were still risking their necks to get at a supposed prize. Shaggy and Slink dove into the hole that Dave had made and joined the others in the robot's head. As Shaggy righted himself and looked around, he spotted various machines still whirling and steaming. Ren and Levy were standing near a bulky terminal which actually looked like it had a keyboard. Did Cog really make a robot with a blatant access port on it? That seems like such a design flaw. Shaggy asked as Slink hurried over. Ren cautiously tapped finger against the tiny keyboard before he answered. It looks like it. We wanted to wreck up this room. But Dave saw this thing, so instead, we halted the robot's motor functions. For now. Vlad materialized out of the mist and huffed as he joined the others at the console. Shaggy let them all work as he and Dave stood watch. More and more players were getting closer, but thankfully, the robots were also swarming. Dave seemed to vibrate as he kept watch out of the hole he had made in the robot's chin. Shaggy snorted, but didn't disagree. It would be if we weren't going to get instantly crashed by the other giant bots. No way, dude. I bet we last long enough to wreck one other giant bot. Yeah, if we don't get overrun by players first. Shaggy said as he spotted the first player to leap aboard their giant robot's body. Hey! Eggheads, you're probably gonna want to hurry it up. Shaggy called as he watched the player get tackled by a silver bot. This isn't easy. Slink called back. Cog's whole interface is text-based, so I have to know the proper commands. What's the issue? Ren asked from the console. Dude, we are sitting on a giant bag of loot and the vultures are circling. Dave said. What do you think the players are going to do when they find out that this thing isn't technically dead? Shaggy added. Not a damn thing. Vlad snarled as he missed it over toward the hole in the robot. Well, you can tell them that then. 'Cause they are climbing all over this thing. Probably looking for loot. It's probably only a matter of time until a guild. This body has been claimed by the Riffraff Guild, a voice shouted from outside. Shaggy rolled his eyes as Vlad's gaze narrowed in anger. Tolliver's familiar build and short-cropped brown hair were visible from their spot inside the robot. Shaggy even saw Obsidian standing next to the large guild leader. Her hands raised and her blonde hair flowing as more and more players joined them on top of the robot. The sounds of clashing metal signaled that the Riffraff Guild were trying to clear the area around the fallen robot. Dave and Shaggy grabbed the vampire and hauled him back. Vlad gave them both traitorous looks, but they ignored him as they let Tolliver outside stake his claim. It didn't matter what the guild said. Once they got the bot back up and in action, their ownership would be apparent. Let the windbag talk, Vlad. Once we're in action, the dumbass will go tumbling. Shaggy looked up at Dave. You mean Pearl? Yeah. Where's she at? Shaggy merely shrugged as Vlad shook himself loose and peered out of the hole. Tolliver was still delivering a rousing speech about how their guild had taken the big robot down. Shaggy tuned the filthy liar out as he turned back to Slink, Ren, and Levy. Both the sorceress and the Paranadan had ceded the terminal to the shorter teen and were both keeping watch. He spotted his wife staring at the inner walls of the robot's brain. What's up, hun? Levy smiled at him before she pointed upward. There's a lot of magic in this robot. Shaggy followed her finger and found small purple lines of magic crisscrossing the inside of the robot's head. They marked the walls and ceiling in intricate patterns. Shaggy felt the hairs on his neck rise as he noticed all the magic writing in the robot's head. Runes? He asked. Levy shrugged. A weird amalgamation of science and magic. It's like he started working on the mechanics of this thing and then got bored and glue it together with magic. Or vice versa. Should we undo it? Don't. Screamed Slink. That magical glue is the only reason this damn terminal works. At least that's what I think. Well, Slink, you're gonna need to hurry. 'Cause the douchebag and the princess are heading this way. Vlad said. Shaggy saw the kid ground his teeth as his fingers hurriedly swiped across the keyboard. Everyone except Slink crowded around the hole as Tolliver and Obsidian walked along the robot's body. Their guildmates were shooting and blasting robots and players away as they paraded down the thing's body. The guild leader and his second came to a stop just below the robot's head, clearly looking at the hole Dave had made under the thing's chin. Shaggy was uncertain if they could be seen. But that became moot as Vlad shouted out of the hole. Beat it, Jack Wagon. The robot's ours. Shaggy pinched his fingers against the bridge of his nose and sighed. "Folks call me impulsive," he muttered. "You are, love." "Yeah. True." Shaggy glared at the 3 other members of his party as Vlad hissed out of the hole. Tolliver's face was a placid mask of disinterest as Obsidian glared angrily in their direction. The pair had a quick, whispered conversation before Tolliver turned back toward them. "It's all right, my guildmates. The guild is here to take possession of this robot. You'll get your reward, I assure you." Dave slapped a hand over an irate Vlad's mouth before he could shout anything back. Shaggy looked at Ren and Levy, trying to speak volumes with his eyes alone. There was no guarantee that Slink was going to be able to get the robot moving. But that didn't mean handing over the spoils to some jump-up asshole. Levy was already nodding as Shaggy turned back to the hole and shouted out of it. Tolly's eye twitched as Obsidian went apoplectic with rage. She raised a pale hand and dark magical energy twisted around her arm before she thrust it forward. Shaggy hit the deck as Every moved away from the missile. Levy chuckled darkly as she summoned her own magic in her hands, fired back. Vlad was already misting up, and Dave had summoned his armor again. Shaggy grew his claws and followed his wife's magical blast out of the hole. Tolly drew both of his short, curved swords and charged as several of his guildmates joined him. He spotted Vlad shifting by him at super speeds and let him aim from Tolliver. Shaggy changed targets to the spell-slinging Obsidian and pounced. Behind him, he heard Ren and Dave charging across the robot's chest. Obsidian sneer as Shaggy barreled at her. Flying through the air with his claws extended, Shaggy was surprised that the woman seemed more annoyed than scared of his sharp claws. Then he slammed into a golden-colored barrier and he knew why. Shaggy began slashing at the barrier with his claws as Obsidian backed away. Shaggy saw spots of purple appear alongside his swipes as Levy blasted her magic into the other player's shield. Suddenly, Shaggy's view was obstructed by a leather chest piece, and he looked up to see Tolliver staring down at him, swords raised. Shaggy didn't like the way the man's swords glowed, so he dove to the side. He idly noted Vlad's mist form clinging to Tolliver's back as he moved. The big guild leader's 2 swords crashed into the robot's metal chest and carved 2 big rends in it. Vlad appeared on the other player's back and bit down hard. But Tolliver barely noticed as he punched a hand over his shoulder. Vlad took 2 punches to the face before his fangs ripped the other player's flesh off. Tolliver's neck glowed yellow before it seemed to heal up. All around, Ren and Dave were clashing with more guildies. They were all woefully outnumbered and the riffraff's mages were keeping their friends up and in the battle. Shaggy ignored Tolliver and pounced toward the nearest guild member. A dour-looking alien with a hand to his temple, like he was using telekinesis or something. Shaggy sliced through the man easily and tried to locate the healers. But a sudden stinging in his side brought him around. Obsidian was tossing balls of black magic at his side as Levy slammed her own missiles into the blonde's shield. The woman looked extremely annoyed as Shaggy took a few more balls of magic before she had to take a break. Shaggy grinned as he saw her shield flicker and he pounced again. But again, Obsidian suddenly disappeared and Tolliver appeared in her place, swords ready. Pain screamed through his abdomen as Tolliver jammed both his blades into him. Shaggy grimaced and tried to cut the man's arms, but Tolliver quickly removed his swords and danced backwards. Shaggy followed as Tolliver's eyes widened. "That's some healing," Tolliver said idly. "Yeah, it comes in handy." Shaggy quipped back as he slashed at Tolliver's legs and then dragged his claws upward. Tolliver parried Shaggy's claws with his sword and backpedaled. "You should have taken the deal." Shaggy merely grinned as he threw himself forward again. Tolliver took the opening to slice into Shaggy's arm and side again. But Shaggy took the swipes and landed his own into Tolliver's side. Green magic flared and for the first time Tolliver screamed in pain. Shaggy glanced down at the eerie, soul-rending glow of his claws before he smiled at Tolliver. The guild leader was favoring his side and grimacing as another healing spell hit him. The yellow glow of the spell seemed slower as Shaggy's own demonic blight fought the healing. Shaggy felt his own wounds seal up and he waved a clawed hand in a come here gesture. Tolliver sneered and readied his swords when a shrill woman's cry made him turn. Shaggy took the opportunity to pounce and raised both his claws. But as he did, Tolliver shifted and disappeared. In his place, a tired-looking obsidian appeared, eyes wide as Shaggy dove at her. She raised her hand, the spell glowing black. But Shaggy claws slammed into her chest and neck. She glared at him as she gurgled and then disappeared into a pile of glowing cubes. Shaggy waved his claws through the cubes as he turned to find Tolliver. The tall guild leader was defending against Ren's hammer as Dave got hit with multiple fireballs. Shaggy traced the magic back to a crowd of guildies that were being harried by Vlad. But before he could do anything, the robot moved. The entire chest of the robot seemed to whir and vibrate. Everyone hurried to regain their footing as the robot put its giant arms down into the dirt and lifted itself up. Vlad disappeared in a black mist as Ren aimed a kick at Tolliver before backing away. Dave was in a full sprint back toward the hole and Shaggy couldn't see Levy anymore. Tolliver chased after Ren as his guildmates abandoned the robot. Shaggy dove in front of Tolliver and stopped a sword from chopping Ren's back. Tolliver grimaced and swung his second sword at Shaggy's face. Shaggy ducked and weaved under the sword as the robot's body shifted. He went for a leg grab, but Tolliver backed away and snarled as he caught his footing. Shaggy grinned and slowly started backing away, claws ready. "You should have taken the deal." Shaggy cackled as he dove forward. He clashed the claws of his left hand against one of Tolliver's swords as he let the other hit him. Bringing up his right claw, Shaggy raked Tolliver's sword arm and chest. Tolliver screamed again and yanked his sword out of Shaggy. The hole in his side slowly closing, Shaggy dove back in, aiming at Tolliver's legs this time. But the robot was almost fully vertical now. Instead of diving near Tolliver's legs, Shaggy was now almost falling down the side of the robot. He got his feet under him and jumped toward the robot's chin. But Tolliver took a swipe at him with a sword, sending him wheeling across the robot's chest. Shaggy focused all of his strength on his right hand and jammed it into the side of the robot. He felt his claws dig a short distance in. Enough to give him some purchase, as the robot finally stood. Across from him, Tolliver was hanging onto his sword that was embedded in the robot. His other sword was held in his hands like a spear and he was aiming it at Shaggy. "Your glass, asshole!" Tolliver shouted, mask of calmness completely gone now. Shaggy grinned back at the guild leader and shouted back. "You're forgetting something, dumbass." Tolliver looked confused for a few seconds. But he quickly brushed it off and got ready to throw his sword. A sudden burst of purple smacked straight into Tolliver's face and singed his hair. Shaggy was sure the man's head would catch fire with another bolt. But he didn't give Levy the chance. Kicking off the robot, Shaggy activated his pounce ability and aimed straight at a confused Tolliver. His right claw caught the player in the shoulder as his legs kicked the man in the chest. With an almighty double kick, Shaggy shoved the riffraff's guild leader straight down the side of the robot. Tolliver's eyes went wide as he lost his grip on his sword and went sailing toward the feet of the robot. Shaggy flipped the asshole the finger on both hands before he jammed the claws of his hand back into the robot. "I've still got friends, asshole," Shaggy called down as Tolliver fell. He was just above the right pectoral now, but the metal wasn't any softer. He still had to focus to get any traction. Shaggy stared down wistfully at Tolliver's sword, still lodged in the robot's chest. But he decided against retrieving it. Mostly 'cause someone was shouting at him. "Don't even think about it, Shaggy," Levy shouted from the hole in the robot's chin. "I wasn't," Shaggy shouted back as he steered the slow journey upward. The curled metal around the neck helped Shaggy gain better purchase as he climbed. But it was still slow going. Meanwhile, whoever was driving the giant robot had aimed them straight at the nearest robot factory. Shaggy could spot other giant robots slowly closing on their bot. He hurriedly tried to scramble back inside. No way in hell did he want to be outside whenever they had to fight another giant robot. With Levy's help, Shaggy pulled himself back inside. The crawl up the robot's chin was rough but doable. The second he was standing on firm ground, he looked around at his friends. Ren was in rough shape, cut up and bleeding in places. Vlad looked exhausted, and even Dave was panting slightly as they all stood around. Nearby, Slink was tapping away at the terminal's keyboard. Now that it was the right side up, Shaggy could see that the terminal was actually much larger than he first thought. Ren's chuckling broke Shaggy's thoughts away from the robot's control systems. The big alien was shaking from laughter until it seemed to catch on. Vlad joined in next with an almost nervous, manic laugh that Dave then took up. Followed by Levy and then Shaggy. "We just glassed the leaders of the riffraff." Ren huffed. Shaggy wiped a tear from his eye. "Hey, I'm the one that KO'd both of them." "Good." Levy chuckled. "Maybe that means they'll just declare war on you." "Either way, that shit was epic, dudes," Dave said as he finished laughing. They all shared a smile and tried not to think about the third largest villain guild being after them. Players could be a vindictive and petty lot. Shaggy wasn't sure how petty Tolliver was, but he would bet the man was going to at least gank Shaggy back. If not wage war on all of Undertown. "Hey, assholes. How about some help over here?" Slink's voice said from the terminal. Shaggy shared a worried glance with Levy before rushing to help the young teen. He wasn't sure of what any of them could do, though. As they got closer to the terminal, Shaggy saw multiple readouts of various systems within the robot. He recognized a few of them, but a dozen more were practically alien. For all he knew, they probably were. "What's up, little dude?" Dave asked as they crowded around the display. Slink's fingers rapidly typed away at the terminal's interface as he brought up various readouts. "Our bot's fuel efficacy is super low. We've got leaks throughout our operator housing, and we've got a robot closing in on us." Shaggy grimaced as he noticed the fuel efficiency readout was displaying problems in the chest and neck. His little wreckfest down there was now costing them fuel. Then he remembered what the damn robot used as fuel and he didn't feel so bad. Levy pushed past his shoulder as she tapped something else on Slink's terminal. "Also, the bot's spell work is deteriorating. Fast. I need to rework it fast or this thing is going to collapse under its own weight and take us with it. I'll plug the leaks," Vlad said, turning into mist and zipping about the room. "What can we do?" Ren asked Slink as Levy started weaving spells. Slink scrolled through the readouts for a few seconds before he responded. "Dave and Shaggy, get to the neck and start fixing things as best you can. I don't have control of the repair bots, so they are going to attack you. We need more fuel going into the heart or we're going to be on the back foot." Dave nodded and gave a fist pump as Shaggy groaned. At everyone's stares, he growled. "Fixing shit is what I do IRL. Why would I want to do that here?" "Because this is a giant robot and if you didn't, you'd get sent to respawn," Slink said flatly. "How much you wanna bet the riffraff have some people camping respawn?" Ren added. Shaggy bit his lip in annoyance, but nodded. He turned to leave, but then he heard what Ren would be doing. "Ren, you're on the manual controls." Shaggy noticed he wasn't the only one that stopped. Everyone was now glaring at the young teen with looks of betrayal. "There are manual controls? Why does he get to be on them? It should be me." Chastened, the others broke off toward their own areas to try to keep the robot together. Behind him, Shaggy heard Ren grumbling. "I feel you overemphasized my weight." Shaggy had just enough time to hear Slink sigh as he and Dave dove back into the darkness of the robot's inner halls. Outside the robot. The party's robot staggered for a few steps as Ren got used to the controls. It swung its large metal arms awkwardly until it started to take on a more natural gait. The legs moved stiffly as they kicked through the various buildings below. Players everywhere scattered around and they took more and more magic blasts from Corrigan's mages. Nearby, another cog robot was slowly trudging closer. Its own arms hung loosely at its side as it moved forward. The party's robot's head scanned left and right, but finding no other targets, closing it pushed forward roughly. Its stuttering steps became more fluid and its body bent forward as it charged the other cogbot. The robots are fighting. Did we gain control of one of the bots? Who has tech powers here? Shouts erupted from the players down in the city as the two robots clashed over and over. Metal sheets went flying, and bolts and cogs rained from the skies. Corrigan still kept up their random carpet bombing. But the players shifted their own attacks toward the cogbot. A few had put together that the one with the City Hall building for a head was the same one that had crashed earlier. Ren Bot tanked a hit to its metal chest and returned its own haymaker. The cogbot's shack-like head crumpled slightly as Ren Bot's metal fist crashed into its jaw. The two robots stumbled as they pulled back their punches, but Ren turned the stumble into a jumping spear that took the cogbot at the waist. With a metal creaking, ground-shaking noise, the cogbot tipped over, the Ren Bot landing on its waist. As the two struggled to right themselves again, more and more players flooded the top of the cogbot's body. Ren Bot pushed itself off the ground and threw a punch upward at the cogbot's face again. Multiple players turned into white cubes as the metal fist slammed through several of them before it crashed into the cogbot. As shouts of alarm went up from the players, the Ren Bot pulled itself into a mounted position and rained down punches on the cogbot's head. Bits of metal, wires, and corpse fluid went flying as the cogbot's head pummeled into mush. Nearby 14, Mel and Sensor stared on in wonder as they watched the fight come to an end. But as they watched, something sparked to life in the factory they had taken. Inside the robot. "Stop!" Slink cried as Shaggy and Dave pulled themselves back into their robot's brain. Shaggy froze even as a tiny needlebot tried to pierce his cheek with its spear-like arms. The little bastards were still everywhere below. But their arms made for great nails as Dave and Shaggy made multiple shoddy patch jobs. Between the two of them, they had patched several pipes and even covered up Shaggy's gash in the hallway. Of course, they couldn't get to all of it. Not with the damn bot shaking and jostling everywhere. Several times, the surrounding walls caved in slightly and they had to find alternate routes or just stop going that way. After the last enormous crash, Dave and Shaggy had decided to return to the brain and see how things were going. As Shaggy took in the scene, he felt his eyes grow wide and idly slapped the needlebot away from his cheek. Ren was standing on a raised platform that looked like a treadmill. On his massive arms and hands were two old-school immersion gloves. He even had an old-fashioned headset on. The big Rhino Man was crouched down on the treadmill, left fist raised, ready to punch. But everyone had frozen at Slink's command. Everyone except Levy, who was awash with magical power. Her hands were raised and Shaggy could see her body shaking as purple streams of magic left her body. The magic raced through the robot's brain and seemed to lash itself to the walls and ceiling. When Levy turned to regard Slink, Shaggy could see his wife was sweating and looked pained. Her eyes widened as she saw Shaggy and she smiled. "Shaggy! Get over here now!" she shouted excitedly. Shaggy quickly nodded and rushed over. As he got close, he realized his wife was running hot. Real hot. Steam was practically rolling off of her in waves. With each pulse of magical energy from her body, she seemed to grow hotter. Shaggy worried about what was going on, but his wife's next words caught him flat-footed. "Cut yourself." "What dash?" "Love, please. Shut up and trust me." Shaggy grunted, but the pleading look in his wife's eyes made him raise a clawed hand as he created 3 long gashes in his arm. With a sigh, Levy pointed a hand full of purple magic at his arm. Tendrils of purple seeped into his rapidly closing wound and seemed to siphon away his blood. Shaggy watched as the magic carried his blood off into the robot's head. Levy sighed roughly before she nodded at his arm as the wound closed. Again. Shaggy sighed, but cut both of his arms this time. Again, Levy siphoned his blood away and carried it toward the walls and ceiling. He even spotted some of it transferring to the ground. She was drawing weird runes in the metal with her magic and Shaggy had a sinking feeling as to what was happening. But Levy was sweating less now, and her body was no longer shaking. Are you farming my blood as a magical catalyst? Shaggy growled exasperatedly. Little bit. Damn it, T. It was the only thing I could think to do, Shaggy. Cog was pulling his magic back from this bot, and I was doing everything I could to hold it in place. But you have demonic blood, love. It's the perfect reagent for this sort of thing. Open another one. She nodded as his now closed wounds, and Shaggy sighed as he did slashed himself again. So what are you doing then, rewriting his runes or something? Levy chuckled as she waved her hands around. His blood swirled around as she literally painted the walls with it. I'm overriding a lot. Old bastard clearly didn't know what he was doing with magical formulas. And you do? Hey, I studied it a bit. Either way, I know more than him. This damn robot is going to be light as a feather and twice as fast. She grinned as she painted the walls. Shaggy grimaced as he felt his wounds close and turned to see Slink and the others crowded around the terminal. Slink had seen something on there, which is why Ren was still not moving on his treadmill. What's going on? He shouted towards Slink and the others. Dave and Vlad looked his direction. But Slink was rapidly tapping away at his terminal. We're taking a capture point, dude. Dave shouted excitedly. What? Vlad grinned evilly. The factories are capture points. The second we got close, Slink noticed a countdown start. Nearby robots are trying to take the place. But the players are holding them back. Holy shit. What does the capture point get us? What does it do? Before Shaggy could answer, Slink slammed a finger down and laughed. Huh. Done. Ren, you have the external speakers. Tell the players what's going on and help defend the factory. We are at a 73% capture rate and raising. Was that the tone we wanted to use? Vlad asked. Sounded diplomatic to me. Shaggy grinned. Outside the robot. XIV couldn't keep the grin off her face as she heard Ren's voice crackle from the giant robot. The speakers were down near the thing's ankles, and the metal everywhere helped the sound echo around. Everywhere, players were excitedly staring up at the robot. Players were piloting the damn thing. The very idea was exciting. No idea, but they weren't lying. We got incoming. Sensor said as he raised his rifle to his shoulder. XIV started exuding battle pheromones from her body as she looked around. Several players had run off when the giant robots started fighting. But she still had a sizable force to work with. Red and blue pheromones only she could see spread out from her body and were absorbed by the other players. Supposedly, the stuff was supposed to make them more alert and faster, but she hadn't tested it that much and never at this scale. She drew her heavy pistol and pointed it at the oncoming robots. They had already been held up in the factory fighting. So what was another wave or two? At least now they knew they were fighting for a capture point. Mel's hand sparked with electricity, and Sensor was already firing away at the oncoming rush of bots. Overhead, Cutie came in for a landing, a large silver energy weapon strapped to her back. A boomerang sailed overhead but was quickly replaced with the green-haired Bartle. The player was weighed down with even more shiny white weapons. This place is going nuts. All sorts of wild tech is springing up everywhere. We got into one of the armories. What do you suppose this little beauty does? Bartle asked as he tossed a green metal egg into the air. Toss it and find out. XIV ordered as she fired her own pistol. Bartle cackled and tossed the oblong grenade. It crashed into a silver robot and burst into a green liquid cloud. XIV stared in wonder as the robot and those around it quickly melted under a wave of green acid. Yoo! Acid bombs. Sweet. Sensor chuckled. Ho 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 ho. What do you suppose the rest of these colorful devils do then? Bartle chuckled as he showed off a handful of more colorful grenades. You'll get to test them all. Cutie said as she put the large energy weapon on her shoulder. XIV nodded and looked upon the wave of silver headed their way. She could feel her blood boil and a tingle of excitement rushed through her. You heard the Legion, folks. Let's take this damn point and then move on to the next. Right. Shouts of excitement and happiness went up from the other players. XIV noticed that defensive weaponry had sprung up around the factory and was being manned by more players. Above them all, the Legion's giant robot stood. Like a monument to player defiance. In the distance, the other giant robots shifted in their direction. All eyes were on their factory now. Even Corrigan's bombing had stopped as the entire battlefield readied for the next stage of the raid. Slink, move us away from the factory. Quick. I can't. We are literally the catalyst for the capture event. If we leave, the players can't capture the factory. Slink shouted. Fingers flying across the terminal. Ren stood ready at his weird robot VR station. Gloved hands clenching and unclenching as he looked through the robot's eyes, sensor, or whatever the robot used to see. Levy was nearby, sitting and taking a break after finishing up whatever magic she had been doing. The entire head seemed to hum with magical energy, but Shaggy was at a complete loss as to what it all meant. He, Dave, and Vlad were all crowded around the punched-out hole in the robot's chin, staring down at the ongoing fight. Dave was shuffling back and forth excitedly, and Shaggy couldn't blame him. The fight was raging below, and they were stuck up here. What the hell can we do? Vlad shouted at Slink, annoyed. Slink kept typing as more and more green text flashed before his eyes. Vlad huffed at being ignored, but soon the teen's voice spoke up. I'm getting the repair bots under control. As soon as we stepped onto the capture point, we started a reboot of the entire system. We have full control of this bot now. I'm just ordering the bots to make repairs, then we are on standby. Shaggy growled as Vlad and Dave made equal noises of displeasure. Slink looked unapologetic as he shrugged his slim shoulders and waved a hand around the head. And this thing sucks. Ren shouted from his treadmill. DR helmet turning toward their voices. It's all vector graphics, and it's in one color. I have a damn headache. You get in this damn thing and see how you like it then, Shaggy. Gladly. Stop. The machine is not going to like us swapping pilots at this point. Trust me. Ren is the best option for the pilot. I'll try to get you some upgrades once the repairs are done and we are on standby. Every head in the room snapped at once as everyone turned to look at Slink with hungry eyes. The pale boy seemed to realize he said something he shouldn't as he immediately clammed up and turned back to his computer. But they weren't going to let the kid get away without explaining. Did he just say what I think he did? Dude, like, what did you mean? Fess up, Slink. Yeah. Get him. Levy shouted from her spot on the floor. The pale teen's shoulders bunched up and then fell as he slowly turned away from the terminal. On the screen was a text-based interface with multiple trees branching in various directions. Slink was currently in the RepairBot tree and a small bar was slowly crawling across the screen. Probably the RepairBots doing their thing. Vlad chuckled as he took in the screen. But Shaggy and Dave both looked at each other, confused. Off to the side, Ren was struggling with the straps of his VR helmet as he tried to move toward them. What's going on? Someone talk to me. Slink has an old-school desktop open and is showing off his computer skills. Slink sighed. I am not. Look. Once we stepped onto the capture point, we woke up the factory and we are allotted a certain number of upgrades. I used one to restore the systems. Dude. Not cool. You should have asked us. Vlad hissed, but nodded at the logic. Shaggy felt that it was a sound plan, but it was going to leave them open for a long time. Not to mention when they chose a ranged upgrade, how long was that going to take? They all shut up for a bit as they digested the weight that was against them. Almost in defiance of their silence, the terminal beeped loudly and Slink turned to examine. What's that now? Ren shouted, having given up removing the helmet. It's just the repair bots. We have a few minor fractures in places, but we are back on track. Weapon options are melee, ranged, or defense. What do we want? Be quick. The nearest robot is tanking its way through artillery fire. Ren said. The witches are back at it? Levy asked. Nope. The players have their own defensive positions. Complete with large cannons, it looks like. Shaggy snorted. Damn it. Why do they get cannons? Hey, Slink, is that an option for us? Slink tapped away for a few seconds. Yep. Shoulder mount or arm cannon. It looks like a beast. Wait. That's going to take forever. Why don't we just get an energy rifle or something? Said Vlad. How is building a giant energy rifle quicker than a shoulder-mounted cannon? Shaggy asked. The vampire shrugged and waved a hand toward the front of the robot. We don't have time, Shaggy. We have to be quick about this. The cannon is quicker. Slink butted in. Shaggy raised his arms triumphantly as Vlad hissed at Slink. The boy gave the vampire a deadpan look as he waved tiredly at the screen again. The cannon uses our own fuel, while the energy rifle would take a secondary power source. The factory could create one, but that would eat up time. The cannon is the best choice if speed is what we want. Vlad threw up his hands and Shaggy high-fived Dave. Slink started tapping away again as Ren took a fighting stance. The robot shook slightly as it mirrored Ren's moves. Ren, try not to move. It'll slow everything down. A thunderous metal crashing noise resounded through the metal head. Shaggy struggled to keep his feet and looked at Ren. The big rhino man was holding his arms up like he was grabbing something. That's not going to be possible, Slink. The robots are here. Outside the robot. Bartle caught his feet as he came out of his teleport. He stumbled a few steps as the ground shook. Above, the Legion's robot had another robot by the arm and was using it to block the other large robots. A blast of blue energy went by Bartle's head and he ducked. His powers were growing like mad in the fight. But he hadn't had a moment to assign points. He pulled a blue grenade from his waist and tossed it toward the robot blaster. He waited out the timer and then covered his ears. He watched as blue sparks arced through the air and robots' bits went flying. They were holding on, but it was a losing battle. The robots just kept coming. He was contemplating making a break for it when Cutie dumped more grenade on in from above. Resupply. The butterfly-winged woman said as she darted away. Bartle grumbled and picked up the sack. At least the factory was still churning out weapons. A few of the more mechanically inclined players were even trying to get the thing to spit out bots. But so far, they hadn't had any luck. Bartle looked around at the mess of pipes and walls that made up the factory and found his perch. Pulling a trusty boomerang from his hip, he tossed it and focused on his power. With a tugging sensation, he blinked and then he was atop a nearby roof overlooking the oncoming robots. A few took pot shots at him as he ducked. Whoa! Where did you come from? A voice asked as Bartle dropped. Bartle glanced up to see several players looking at him. Some had rifles, but most weren't armed with anything. Bartle threw on his best grin as he gripped his bag of grenades. Oi, sorry mates. I'm a teleporter. Just wanted a nice spot to toss them bots some nice presents. A few of the players winced at his accent, but Bartle ignored it as he reached into his bag. He pulled a green oblong and tossed it over his shoulder off the roof. Clanking metal and hissing pistons wound to a stop as Bartle smiled up at the other players. Where did you get those? One player asked, a red demon-like alien. Bartle waved a hand toward the factory's main complex. Back at the main factory. Damn thing is churning them out. Me and my mates are supplying the lines with them. You want a couple? Some players nodded, and Bartle started handing things out. But the red alien growled. Don't just take shit offered to you by random players. Are you all children? Hiya mate. We are all in the same war here, right? Why don't I let you lot take a load of these beauties, and I'll skedaddle? Is skedaddle Australian? A player asked. It is when I speak it. Bartle shouted before he coughed awkwardly. He was about to resume handing out grenades when a commotion overhead made them all look up. It took Bartle a second to look past all the flying robots and players zooming about the place. But soon he found what was causing such a stir. Is something being built on the Legion's robot? A player asked. It looks like. Even as the Legion bot was fighting off the other robots, a skeleton of a frame was slowly appearing on the robot's shoulder. It was filling in before their eyes, but slowly. What are them crazy drongos doing now? Bartle muttered as he watched. I don't know. But I want a piece of it, said the red alien. Bartle scoffed. Pfft. All right. If you know where a spare robot is, then. Bartle almost slapped himself with a grenade as he hurriedly grabbed for his boomerang. He cut his finger on the sharp edge of the damn thing, but he ignored it as he aimed himself. The other players were looking at him oddly, but he ignored it as he tried to remember where XIV was. Hey! Wait, and he's gone. That was weird. What do you think he was doing? The red alien player slapped his forehead. Growling, he turned to explain to his teammates what was surely going through plenty of other players' minds. Inside the robot. I'm getting my ass kicked. Ren shouted as he threw his arms in wide punches. Well, don't let them kick your ass, dude. Dave shouted helpfully. Shaggy snorted as he watched the large rhino alien shadowboxing on a treadmill. Every block and swing was accompanied by a loud clanging of metal as the two robots clashed. Shaggy wondered if his ears were bleeding from all the noise. Ren kicked a robot back and then got his arms up in a defensive position. The big guy wasn't just fighting the other bots, he was doing his best to keep the damn things away from the factory. All of them seemed intent on either getting to the building below, and Shaggy didn't want to know why. Weapons ready. Get to the shoulder and I'll see about, Slink started to say. But the sounds of Shaggy swearing and Dave and Vlad speeding away filled the head. Both speedsters rushed off to the left shoulder, so Shaggy took his chances with the right side. He blew Levy a kiss as he ran into the dark hallway. He swayed and zigged through the narrow spaces until it opened up and Shaggy smiled. A new-looking hallway of silver metal branched off from the narrow hall of pipes and cogs, and Shaggy immediately followed it. His elation was short-lived, however, as blue and black blurs were rushing his way. Pushing himself, Shaggy threw open the first door he saw and rushed in. He smiled at the sound of Vlad hitting the door and swearing before he took in the room. It was a large, round room. The same silver as the hall, and at its center was a recessed seat with a targeting screen in front of it. Shaggy held in delight and jumped for the seat as the door opened. Surprisingly, Vlad's ass was half on the seat as Shaggy took the controls. Back off, Lugosi. You didn't even want the thing. Shaggy snarked. Well, wait your damn turn. I'm firing this thing first. Shaggy wrenched the twin joystick controls toward him as Vlad's pale hands reached for it. The two wrestled over the controls for a few seconds until a sharp knock on Shaggy's head made him see stars. Vlad looked just as punch-drunk as they both rubbed the tops of their heads and glared at Dave. The laid-back surfer dude was doing his best to glare at them, but the twitching of his lips revealing a smile. Kind of ruined it. Both you dudes need a timeout. I think I am the one most ready to give this giant weapon a shot. Haha. Can it, hippie? I'm firing this cannon. Actually, let him have it. Shaggy said. Both Vlad and Dave twisted their heads in confusion. But Shaggy shrugged. Hey, I don't want Vamps here to get the first shot. He doesn't want me to have it. So why don't you get it and then decide who goes second? Shaggy got out of the seat and stood aside as Vlad glared daggers at him. Dave chuckled to himself and sat down as Vlad moved away. I know what you're doing. Vlad mouthed at him over Dave's head. Shaggy merely shrugged as Dave got familiar with the cannon controls. He was really fine with letting Dave have the first shot. And if, once he was done, he wanted to hand off the controls to Shaggy, why that would just be the kindest thing to do, wouldn't it? Dave was nothing if not kind. Outside the robot. Boom. Holy shit, is that loud? XIV said as she covered her ears and looked up. Sensor went down like a pile of jelly as the noise from the robot's new cannon echoed everywhere. She saw multiple flyers go spinning off into the smokestacks as the shockwave from the cannon caught them off guard. She really hoped Cutie wasn't up there. She hunkered down behind a bit of metal scaffolding that had fallen off the factory wall and reloaded her large pistol. Sure, the energy variety was quicker to reload. But 14 had always preferred the tactile sensation of loading actual bullets into a gun. All around her, players were firing their powers or throwing their skills at the oncoming horde of robots. These new silver bots weren't color-coded like the ones outside the city, so figuring out their powers was a pain in the dick. A sudden burst of dirt was kicked up as an orange and red speedster tore around the area. XIV seethed as she watched the kick up a damn sandstorm on their position. I think he's charmed, 14. Mel shouted from next to her. Her friend's eyes were glowing blue as electricity sparked in her hands. Mel still looked ready to zap the speedster on 14's orders. But XIV raised a hand as the speedster was tackled to the ground by a few other players. Mel sighed and threw her collected ball of lightning at the oncoming robots. XIV finished reloading and glanced over the scaffolding for a target. It was pointless. She could fire into the sky and probably hit 3 robots at once. The damn things were everywhere. Getting into a firing stance, she blasted off a few rounds into the approaching horde until she had to take cover. How long do we have to do this? Mel asked as a fireball flew over their heads. XIV winced as it barely missed Sensor's prone body. He hadn't cubed yet, so he wasn't dead. Just knocked out. XIV waved at the healers that were standing further back and then pointed at Sense. A few gave her the okay sign, but didn't move, as the robots were still throwing their powers around. XIV was about to answer Mel's question when another shout came from above. Oncoming debris. A flyer shouted down at them and then dashed off. XIV looked up in time to see a large sheet of metal falling from the sky. Shit. She and Mel bolted for the back line near the mages as bits of metal were falling everywhere. Scream and shouts of annoyance were everywhere as players were pelted with debris of all sizes. XIV even saw a large, muscular alien get flattened by a silver plate. Glancing up, XIV noticed that the Legion's robot had blasted a sizable hole in one of Cog's robots. Once the debris seemed to slow, XIV and Mel walked back to their original position. As they did, they passed the tech players that were all huddled around the factory terminal. They were still trying to figure the thing out. But other than displaying a capture rate readout, it did little else. Mel threw a bolt of lightning again as they retook their positions, and XIV fired off a few more shots. We can't keep this up. XIV sighed as she looked around. Players were still smiling and having a good time. But it was a waiting game right now, and that didn't sit well with XIV. She wanted to be doing something. Blasting bots was fun and all, but they needed something more. Ladies, Bartle said as he appeared suddenly next to Mel. The blue-haired mutant almost fried the fake Aussie. But she held back. Bartle grinned as Mel's electricity lit up his face. The contrast between the blue glow and his green hair creeped XIV out. What do you want, Bartle? I think I have an idea. Not sure if it'll work. But I thought I'd ask you two lovely Sheilas if you wanted to join me. XIV and Mel shared a dubious look. Depends what it is. Bartle chuckled as he duck-walked a little closer to 14. I was wondering. What would happen if someone got into that other robot? What other robot? Mel asked. The broken one? Probably nothing. I'm sure someone has already tried and gotten nowhere. Otherwise, we'd have 2 of the damn things up there, blowing out our eardrums. The rapport of the Legion's cannon went off again. underscoring Mel's point. But 14's mind whirled. Bartle seemed to think along the same lines as her, because the player wasn't deterred. Sure, a few wankers have probably tried. But how many actually have an in with the mad lads upstairs? Do you think we can reach them? XIV asked. Send the butterfly? She can't fly that high. Something about air pressure and cold or something. Personally, I just think she fears getting torn to pieces by those flying robots. Mel grinned. Not exactly a stupid fear. Bartle said defensively. XIV rolled it over in her mind. If they could get inside the broken robot and then contact the Legion. Then what? Could they really do anything? Was it worth the risk? She looked around at the various players defending each entrance that led to the main factory. There were hundreds of them. Even if they went to check it out, they wouldn't be missed. She smiled. Mel, grab us an egghead and meet by the downed robot. Mel nodded slowly before she rushed off. Bartle held in triumph, but a stern look from XIV made him shut up. XIV shifted her pheromones to a weird concoction that supposedly made people forget about them. She stuck close to Bartle and hurried along toward where the downed bot lay. As they passed a restored sensor, XIV patted him on the shoulder and waved for him to follow. Huh? What? Wait, where are we going? Sensor asked as they shuffled off through the crowds of players. Inside the robot. Shaggy tried not to meet his wife's eyes as she glared down at him and Vlad. They might have gotten a little rough with the controls after Dave's initial shot had gone off. But why did the shitty metal have to snap so easily, anyway? Vlad sniffed audibly as he looked out at the new vid screen on the far wall. You two are idiots. Levy said finally as she walked away. Shaggy said nothing, but scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Nearby, Vlad spun to glare at the tall drow woman. He started to say something, but he quickly bit it back. He and Shaggy shared a look and then went back to watching the fight. Shaggy's blood boiled as he watched Ren slowly decimate the cog robots. The second phase of the raids was clearly winding down, but the old bastard still had not stuck his head up. Regular gaming convention stated that the raid was probably going to come in 3 parts. But Shaggy was unclear what constituted winning in this phase. He was about to bring it up when Slink jerked near his console. The boy had been diving into the file system of the robot, looking for anything of note. Vlad and Levy also noticed the boy's sudden move. What's up? Shaggy called. Slink's eyes scanned the screen and then he tapped a few keys. Looking up at nothing, the pale teen asked. Hello? A voice crackled to life out of the air and seemed to echo in their robot's head. Yo yo. Got you loud and clear. This is the SS Shitkicker coming at you live from the ground floor of the War Ack. They all heard a brief scuffle before a familiar voice spoke up. This is 14. We are in the defeated robot. The head is trashed to shit, but we were wondering if you could offer assistance. They all crowded around the terminal as Slink rapidly started typing again. Slink was digging down through the file system again. But apparently couldn't find what he was looking for. What systems do you have up? I got ya. Looky here. We got the basics of basics over here. I'm trying to talk to this thing with my powers. But it's yakking in a different language. Capice? Gee, wonder what that's like. Vlad snarked, but he was quickly shushed by Levy and Shaggy. Slink typed a few more commands into the terminal before he turned to Ren. Ren, grab the broken bot and drag it toward the factory. Kind of busy here. Ren shouted from his position in the wall. Be quick about it. We might be able to bring in some backup. Hello, hello? What's the dealio? What we working with? Yeah, can I speak to XIV, please? Slink said, rubbing his eyes. There was some anger muttering coming from the communications. But soon XIV was back. Yeah, hello? Can you help? I think so. We're going to move your robot toward the factory. When we got close, all our systems rebooted, and we regained control. You should see several commands come to life as soon as we get you close. Roger. XIV said. The following few minutes were slow going as Ren tried his best to dance over to where the broken bot lay. It wasn't really far. But with the other giant robots getting in his way, the big guy had to dance around a bit. Dave backed him up as best he could, but the cannon was slow to fire. Once Ren grabbed the other bot's legs, XIV and her team shouted in alarm. Whoa! Holy shit! Warn a guy. Shaggy recognized several voices on the other end of the line. But before he could strike up any conversation, a holler came from the second bot. There was a weird cascade of dueling keyboards as both Slink and his counterpart in 14's robot typed away. Ren went back to fighting the robots and defending the factory as Slink explained things. Shaggy sat back and watched the fight through the robot's screen. The raid so far had been excited, but this was surely the slowest part. We've got incoming, a male voice said from the other robot. Shaggy thought it was Sensor. Bots? XIV asked. Nope. Players and they don't look friendly. Sensor answered. Tell him being in this bot is boring as shit. Shaggy couldn't help but shout. All I'm doing is watching a giant robot fight other giant robots. It's great, but I could watch anime for that. Levy sighed loudly. Don't you get it, love? That's the point of these robots. It's a way to give players some downtime while also keeping the raid going. We can all rest and get ready for the final round. Sure, the pilots are going to be a little strained, but the rest of the players will be ready. Shaggy stroked his chin as Vlad stared at Levy. Jaw flapping uselessly. When did you figure that out? When we were upgrading the robot. After I got the magic in here fixed, Oh shit, that's right. Slink shouted up at nothing. Second robot? You need a mage to redo the spell work throughout your robot. Cog has a magical thing. That helps the robots somehow. We reworked ours, so you'll probably have to do something similar. Huh? Oh, that shit? I wiped it all out. Said 14's tech guy. My power allows me to hold this thing together pretty well. But I'll inform the next guy. Levy and Slink shared a look before they both shrugged. Shaggy wondered if 14's team would be crushed by the sheer weight of their robot before they could even stand. Shaggy shuddered at the image. But he didn't dwell on it. If XIV and her team wanted to take the risk, they were free to do so. What was that? Ren called. The realm just went white. The capture point is done. Slink cheered. We have full control. Those on the ground can start making bots and start fighting back. Sweet. Shaggy smiled before he looked at the vidscreen again. Ren was now loose to take it to the remaining robots. But there were other defeated bots lying where Ren and Dave had dropped them. However, there were also other factories. Sure, they were run by the guilds, but who was going to say no to a giant robot being dropped on their doorstep? Ren scanned the entire realm. His view being passed on to the vidscreen Shaggy and the others could see. 14's robot was lying next to the main factory. Its broken and twisted head slowly rebuilding itself. Multiple players were swarming the head, and Shaggy was a little worried about XIV and her team. But there was little he could do. Instead, he waited and watched as slowly the second player-controlled robot pulled itself to its full height and started to move around. This is cool. XIV sang as their bot moved. 14? Shaggy called. Yeah? There are more giant robots broken on the field. Shaggy grinned. His friends all smiled at him as Ren quickly rushed off to grab another broken robot. 14's robot was still gathering its feet. But the players below were spreading out like a swarm of ants. Everyone was making their way toward a robot now. The factory was churning out silver robots that followed the players. Shaggy glanced at the other 4 factories around the map of Cog City. If the bastard would not come out and play, then they were just going to keep stealing his shit until he did. They were villains, after all. He just hoped the old man would sew up soon. Sitting in a giant robot doing nothing, while cool, was quickly getting old.